Hey everybody, welcome back to Human Reaction, your weekly source for independent commentary on cultural news and politics, where it's always our mission to arm you with the tools you need to cut through media misdirection and resist the mono-narrative. Why? Because we want to create a better world for the country, for everybody, for humans to be prosperous and free. David Rand, what are we talking about today?
First up, Candace Owens has parted ways with the Daily Wire, a very controversial issue surrounding her views on Palestine and Israel after her interview with a rabbi. And we're going to be talking about that. Have we reached peak trans? The WPATH Files suggests that the science is actually activism. Very interesting story. We'll get into the revelation there. We're all shocked. And then last, Gamergate 2.0. Return of the woke. So we're going to see what that is all about. And then lastly, for our exclusive members only content, we're going to be covering this week, is Hunter Biden a CIA asset? If you want to check that out, definitely check out our memberships.
Yeah, and speaking of our memberships, thank you to everyone that's supporting us. We're finally making something off of this thing.
We're doing this
We're
thing.
finally doing this. So thank you so much, everybody that's supporting us. You can find details of how to join our memberships at humanreactionpod.com or, in the show notes down below on whichever podcast platform you're on. All of our links for everything is there. And then while you're here, please like, comment, subscribe on our channel, wherever you are. And especially on YouTube, hit that notification bell so you can get notified every time that one of our episodes drops. Because sometimes you just don't see it. You're on the algo's feeding you things and it doesn't get there, but you can actually just get notified for us right there. And a lot of people don't realize that is there.
Totally.
Also join our Discord community. We have some juicy memes in there, but also conversations about what's going on in the episodes, what's going on in the news. And our meme of the week, this one, is about our last episode. Meet a listeners who stop listening halfway through the Brigitte conspiracy. And then it's Woody with the dude from Kingdom Hearts. I don't remember. I never played the Kingdom Hearts game. Saying, hold up, let him cook.
It is a very funny meme.
It's a great meme. Brought to you once again by our in-house meme lord in chief, my brother, Sam Sheehan. Thank you, sir, for your duty to our Discord server. Great place.
Because that was a hell of a conspiracy episode last week. And it was definitely interesting to dive into that.
Not a conspiracy if it's true.
Well, I mean, it is a conspiracy. Conspiracies can be true, right?
Yeah.
It's just not a theory if it's a fact.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of theorizing that has to go to
it. Okay, quit left braining this. By the way, guys,
I am doing that.
Before we go into our first topic, which I'm very, very interested to go into, we should note, just let all of our inner 13-year-olds out for 1 second and acknowledge that this is episode 69.
Nice.
All right, moving on.
All right, so Candace Owens has left the Daily Wire. We have a short video clip of her final sign-off before her final episode where she kind of suggests it and gives some context.
Weeks, I will be out to Israel and I will be out to Gaza, and I will be able to report to you guys what it is that I actually see. But I also want to say this because it's so important. I am Team God. Okay? I'm Team God. I do not fear the media. I do not fear journalists. I do not fear AIPAC. I don't fear Big Pharma. What I actually fear is God. I think that one day we are all going to have to account for the things that we have done and the things that we have said. And I want to make sure that I am not a person that is parroting lies. The fear of losing your job, encouraging some people to spit out lies, I don't think that works in the end. Right? I think you've got to check your priorities. And so with that said, I want to thank everybody who has been on this journey with me, people that have supported me. I especially want to thank all of the Jewish people that have been in the comments saying how outraged they are. And I know that it is especially difficult for you guys right now because you are being smeared, I mean, I'm not going to go away. I'm going to use my God-given voice to talk about the things that are important for me. I'm just asking to be left alone, or at least just report the truth. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, that is all the time that we have for today. But don't worry, because we will see you tomorrow for a brand new episode.
Yeah,
okay.
So, and the context, that was her last episode. They parted ways. Their relationship disbanded, according to Jeremy Boring, who's like the CEO. He's really the chief of Daily Wire.
His Twitter says he is lowercase God King of Daily Wire.
Yeah, sounds like he's compensating.
I
for
think that's
something.
yeah.
I will say it was interesting. I scanned through the comments on his tweet about it, and it was probably 95% supportive of Candace.
Oh,
Just,
interesting. On his tweet.
On his tweet about it. A lot of people, which shows the divide, and I think that's what we're going to cover here, because we want to kind of go through the interesting debate that Candace had with a rabbi.
Before we do, can we just, because this is like such a watershed moment, right? Obviously, it's super pivotal for a voice that is an incredibly important one in the independent journalism space. But I feel like for those of us who have been kind of watching her work and this all kind of unfold, this has been something that's sort of been in the works for a while. It seems like this tension has been building, especially between her and Ben Shapiro, right? What was sort of the lead up to this situation?
Well, so the Ben Shapiro, so when October 7th happened, and so everything started Israel Hamas, right? She put out these tweets that were basically saying along the lines of, I don't believe it's good when anytime a government does genocide. And she put this, which seems like that's probably going to age well, that tweet. It's pretty good.
Pretty solid.
I think it's pretty solid. I think most people are on board with that. But then put these biblical passages saying like, blessed are the peacekeepers, all these things. And then Ben Shapiro quote tweeted her and was like, Candace, if you feel that way, perhaps you should quit the Daily Wire, something like that. So there's this beef that's been kind of going there since October, and I think it's been there for a while beyond that. Over time, you have very famous Rabbi Shmuley, former spiritual advisor to Michael Jackson, very big in the Jewish community, started this big fraternal order at Oxford, which has all these people that have gone through, senators. Like, he's a very kind of famous rabbi. He's been calling on her to quit the Daily Wire for years and has been harassing her for years. I don't like the guy.
Is his criticism of her because of past comments she's made about
anti-Semitism,
the Jewish community, or more broadly?
Anti-Semitism.
I wouldn't say the Jewish community. I would say about Israel.
Oh, okay.
Right? I'm not familiar with any accusation that was about Jews in general. Right? It was
more Zionism.
Well, no,
specifically,
this is, and I think we'll get into this with this interview with Rabbi Barclay. This is as a whole, it's hurtful to Jewish people. All this stuff, it's like the very collective mindset that is happening here, and her comments being it's not like she's anti-Israel. She's just not happy with certain things that are happening with Israel right now, and she sympathizes kind of with both sides. There's a both sides element. There's good people on both sides.
Additionally, what really got her was when she elevated the Ben Shapiro conflict to Tucker Carlson, because then it brought it to this whole huge platform. And then she said, not only is he wrong about Israel, but he was wrong about COVID. He's blah 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 blah, and she hit Ben on like a bunch of different stuff. So then, obviously, that really raised the temperature and the stakes. And then she has, but her policy position, as I understand it, if I'm quoting it fairly, isn't that she believes that the United States should force Israel to do anything. It's just that we shouldn't be supporting Israel militarily or with our weapons.
Which is very classic within like the America First, milieu of Republican politics, that type of agenda, right? Like that's what you would hear from like Vivek Ramaswamy. It's what you would hear from Tucker Carlson. It's not necessarily new. And it seems like, just with what I'm seeing in the internet space, it seems like that's kind of like the dissident youth of the right seems to, like, the grassroots kind of element seem to be, that's where they are too. Right?
Or at least heading that way.
Yeah.
I mean, it seemed like when October 7th happened, there was a largely like a very typical right-wing push on behalf of Israel to get the bad guys, which is, understandable. I mean, when we covered it, we often covered it in terms of like an inescapable trap, that you've put yourself in because of the cycle of violence, right? So we're in this place that it's hard to get out of, how to understand that and how to think about that. We didn't do a lot of prescription, but a lot of people were willing to say, no, you got to do whatever it takes to punish these bad guys, right?
But I've been saying this, and because this is what I've been noticing since the beginning, since October 7th, is it's like the dissident youth of right-wing politics have not been on board this entire time.
Correct.
Is what it seems like to me.
With the Israeli response.
Yeah, with the Israeli response, with just the general happenings, everything that we've covered about Israel Hamas, right? So like, it's not even necessarily like they've changed. It's really just like the institutional Republican conservative, like big conservative wing that are kind of like the old radio hosts, the boomers, the neocons. They're the ones that have been pushing it all the time. But like the people like Candace and Tucker, like kind of the more independent style journalists, all the independent people for the most part seem to on right-wing politics, not all, but most seem to very much more so be like, we shouldn't be supporting this.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and that definitely tracks with, at least your comment about the youth sort of not really supporting the Israel's response totally tracks with the leaked phone call from the ADL regarding the generational problem that they have regarding, support for the Palestinians and that sort of thing. So perhaps it's not that the right-left paradigm as they thought, as he said in the call. It's more of an age gap thing, and it appears that
Seems to be
that there is a presence on the right that is of that mind as well.
Well, except for the fact that the America First, I think that the way I kind of think about it is like Donald Trump introduces and re-legitimizes an America-orientated foreign policy interest stake in the American people by arguing, why are we at war in Iraq? Like, this doesn't make any sense, right? Having a well-known, famous Republican person say that legitimized a whole bunch of America First, what the opposition has been called isolationism for about 70 years. All of a sudden, it was mainstream again. And when that happened, I think we've seen is a ton of boomers who got caught up in the war on terror see it go into a forever war that reminds them of Vietnam, and then being like, oh, they all lied to us. And then they had Donald Trump come in and say, no, it's okay to be your age, our demographic, and think that this is all BS done on behalf of globalists to enrich them rather than on behalf of American foreign policy security interests. And so now it looks like to me like they've continued that logic. And as Trump is obviously playing a political game where he has to appease the Israel lobby while doing his, while trying to maintain a coherence in his foreign policy.
Well,
views.
and you have Jared Kushner saying that there's a nice waterfront property there in Gaza. Right?
Yeah. And then it gets complicated the minute you start to get into how the Abrahamic Accords kind of set up this whole situation, but we don't have to talk about that right now.
Yeah. So what kind of happens with this, especially after the elevation of Candace on Tucker, when it comes to this? And they were just kind of talking about they were just talking about this. Like it wasn't anything them really throwing support behind anyone or anything. It was kind of banal, really. You have Rabbi Shmuley, who's this guy, again, spiritual advisor to Michael Jackson, very famous rabbi. And then you have this guy, Rabbi Barclay, who was writing these articles, and he's very much in the conservative wing of things. And he was writing these hit pieces on Candace, basically saying like she's an anti-Semite for this reason, this reason, this reason, this reason. So Candace this week had him on her podcast, and they debated this. They debated his article. They debated the definition of anti-Semitism. They debated all these things. And we want to play some clips of those because I think it's very telling on what's happening here. Like, spoiler, I think what was being done here was very slimy. The way that he kind of was attempting to gaslight certain things, and like the way, and it's very clear to me that you have people not seeing the same realities here. They pull up clips of what she said, and they both just do not see it the same way at all. And we'll play some of that here. So do we want to get, and I will say actually, after this interview, that article was retracted by PJ Media, the outlet that put the article out.
Which article?
The thing that Rabbi Barclay put on her, hitting her as an anti-Semite.
I see.
After this debate, they retracted it because there just wasn't enough source information, not enough evidence, all this stuff, right? So it's basically his arguments were flawed, and they retracted it.
And it was just a hit piece.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So first, let's go. So this is them attempting to define anti-Semitism as a hate that mutates.
So, and I'm gonna just push back just gently here. For me personally, if I thought that racism could just be an ever-shifting definition based on the experience of Black people, it would be a remarkable power, and I would be able to create something like BLM, which could say that everything was racist. So I am not going to be able to agree that definition should be able to transform according to what's happening during the day. But here's what I will say.
I want to pause before. So I stopped this. There's actually some context that's probably worth saying. When they start this discussion here, he pulls a Putin and goes back to, in 1148, there's the blood libels, and he goes into this long diatribe of like history of saying like, Jewish hate was like this at this point. Jewish hate was like this at this point. And he goes on for like 5 minutes talking about this. So this is the kind of the context here is there's this definition that has been accepted as it is this hate that mutates. There's famous rabbi in England that said this. So she is kind of pushing back against this idea of like the definition should just be this ever changing thing, right? So we'll kind of have where he says from here.
If you could, just because I think it's really important for us to get to going through this article, because then you might be able to explain why you view it as anti-Semitism. If you could just give us what you are saying the current definition of anti-Semitism is today, that would be very helpful.
The current definition of anti-Semitism today has to do with what the feelings are. It has to do with anti-Zionism, number one. That is a definition. Anti-Zionism, anti-Israel is anti-Semitism.
Okay.
This isn't
so you believe that Jewish people can be anti-Semitic?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I don't get to tell a black man if he's experiencing racism. Mm-hmm. He knows. I don't get to tell you if you're experiencing misogyny. You know. If I make a comment and it's misogynistic, and you say, Rabbi, you know that was really misogynistic, my job is to say, wow, I didn't mean that. I apologize. That's not what I meant. And you do not get the right to say what is anti-Semitic or Jew hatred. I'm sorry.
I'm not trying to. I don't think I said anything about me having the right. I just said to you, would you then view, because I did host somebody who is Jewish, Dave Smith, on my show, and I'm sure you're familiar with him. He's a comedian, he's a libertarian. He is not pro-Zionist. So I'm just asking you for clarity, because you're saying that you can't dismiss a Jewish person, but aren't you thereby dismissing Jewish people who say that I don't support Israel as a state? I'm just trying to have you answer that question.
And the answer is, I will ask you back the same question. Mm-hmm. Are there blacks who do not support blacks? Are there pick the cause or the minority who do not support or actually even better? You and I both sit on the conservative side politically. We share that, right? And we face the same way when it comes to that. And we both, I think, are disappointed in those who are Republicans in name only, correct?
Yes.
Okay. Does that mean they're not Republicans?
Well, I wouldn't describe a race as a political ideology, like a political party. That's very different. So to say that you can't be a race, like you're not black if you don't support this, is different than, like, you're basically saying that a Jewish person can be anti-Semitic. So that would be like saying a black person can, in fact, be racist towards, or they're not black.
Look, I'm not going to comment on black community. Mm-hmm. I will say there are plenty of self-hating Jews.
Okay, so you do believe, that's all I was trying to get you to say, is that Jewish people who don't support Israel, you are saying they are anti-Semitic. I just want to understand that.
I'm saying it very clearly, they are self-hating Jews.
The edits really made that.
Yeah. For those of you just listening, there was a lot of interesting camera cuts.
Some nice punch-ins.
I want more of those, Bennett. More punch-ins.
Yeah, we need more punches. We need more work for Bennett.
Okay. Well, this is such an interesting question. I want to pose it to both of you and also to the audience. What do you think of that statement? Can a Jew be anti-Semitic? Can a black person be racist against other black people? What do you guys think? How do you shake that out?
It's the Uncle Tom thing, right?
Well, what's interesting is that his argument, and it wasn't really captured there, but to unpack it just a little bit more, his argument is that the reason why you have self-hating Jews is because the pressure to integrate to the society will cause them to not support the Zionist cause in order to fit in, and that's why they're self-hating. But what I have to wonder is most of the most traditional forms of Judaism across the West, like Hasidic Jews, aren't Zionists. Most of them are on the other side of that issue, and I really struggle to say them, who are the least integrated to society, who dress the different way, have the hair, do the things, do all that culture.
Dig some tunnels.
Those weren't Hasidics. Those were a different faction. Right, yeah. But yes, dig tunnels. Jesus Christ. I lost it.
David's so concerned he's going to get canceled over this.
No,
I'll cut that. But
I'm just teasing. It's all right.
No,
it's all right.
leave that.
That was hilarious.
Funny. That's
funny. How do you make the case that their desire to not support Zionism is only motivated by their desire to integrate? It's like they're the least integrated ones. So I just don't. I think it's a really bad argument.
Yeah.
Seems like to me.
Well, and Zionism is probably important to define this, and I might wade into being anti-Semitic here. I might misstep on my definition of Zionism, but the Zionism was kind of like a European Jewish movement in all the philosophical groundwork that laid out for the recreation of the state of Israel in like 1948 and all the war that led up to all that and all that right. And then getting kind of Western support of that. So when we're talking about like anti-Zionists, they're saying that they're trying to make the case here that if you don't support Zionism, you're essentially saying that Jews don't have a collective right to live. That's the logical leap that they're making.
Right. Well, actually, it's what I call teleological trap. Teleology is that you define a thing in order to build your argument off that thing. So you build your logic off of a fundamental agreed on definition. And why they can't get anywhere is because they have a teleological disagreement. What is anti-Semitism? He wants to he creates a trap by defining anti-Semitism as anti-Zionism.
Right.
Up front. He doesn't use those words. What he says is their right to exist as a group. And one of the things about that is if you say that, then the question is do you say that for all groups, right? Do all groups have an inherent right to an ethnic state? Right. And if so, what does that mean? Right. How do you unpack that into a larger political philosophy that suggests that everyone deserves to have their own ethnic state? And then now do you support Kurdistan? What are you doing to support Kurdistan right now? I have to support militarily Israel. Are we supporting Kurdistan?
Yeah.
Those sorts of questions then get, blown out. That's the interesting part to me. And then it is a novel definition that suits his political needs, not a definition that everyday people would understand. Right? Because most people, when they hear anti-Semitism, they hear someone who thinks Jews are inferior or nefarious in some way, right? That they're evil by nature or have some kind of terrible character, which is obviously stupid and false and dumb, right?
Yeah.
That everyone agrees on.
Yep.
The question at hand is, once you create that teleological trap, how should people respond? And what Candace's case is like, once you try to create that trap that everyone can see, it looks like you're trying to manipulate me, and therefore you're creating more anti-Semitism.
Yeah, it looks like you're being sleazy and following into the stereotypes.
Yeah.
Right? Like that's what it looks like. Because what she wants to have is let's just have like a simple definition. Like racism is hatred of a race that's not your own. And it might be because they're inferior, evil, whatever.
Yeah.
So like, let's have a very simple definition to work with on anti-Semitism, which would be just like, you have a hatred or inferiority type of thing about Semitic people. Like it could be that simple, but what they're doing with a lot of this academic work, he does a lot of appeals to authority about academic work and stuff.
Which it was always frustrating me because I wanted to call him out on it and be like, but scholars agree. And it's like this is not going to work right now.
So but he's just like, which is, and it's very proper. Like it's very important. He does, Rabbi Sachs in England, he always comments about him, who says this very specific thing. It is a unique hate that mutates. And the unique thing is a very important factor, and we'll play into some of these future clips because everything's about like a unique evil, a unique hate, it's like there's something extra special about this hate versus other forms of hate, which is very similar to a lot of postmodern thought around critical race theory and queer theory. And you see a lot of the same dynamics happening there.
Yeah, that's interesting. I found it odd that he wasn't willing to speak out, against, or to say, oh, I'm not going to speak to the black community or any other community, but he was willing to make the assertion and speak on behalf of Jews that they could be self-hating, as if he could see into their psyche how they feel about themselves or their own people. I found that very interesting.
The idea is very much like, you're not focused on the best interest of our people, and we're defining what our best interest is.
Well, I have a question about that too. Based on his definition, couldn't say Dave Smith in this example, couldn't Dave Smith be like, well, him saying that I'm a self-hating Jew is anti-Semitic to me?
Yeah.
It just seems like it takes like a vicious circle.
It's all a circular logic.
You're acting like an individualist. The problem here is it's collectivism. It says we as a group have a thing we're doing, but it's not possible for groups to act. Right? You can observe the commonalities in groups, but groups don't act, individuals do. So you have this this conflict, especially from a conservative point of view, that is he a conservative community? I don't know anything about the guy's political philosophy, but he claims to be that, right? In the Western sense, that would indicate that you behave by the rules of individualism first, which is that the individual decides what their orientation is to the group that they're in.
Yeah.
Right? Candace Owens does not identify with Black Lives Matter, despite being black, right? Or maybe because she's, or you could say that, or you could say, or because she's smart and doesn't fall for the propaganda. Any of those things are reasonable interpretations in individuals, like culture of interpretation of how groups relate to individuals. The opposite of that is, oh, you're insert group, therefore you must follow X philosophy or X belief set.
Yeah, and it destroys the individual's sovereignty to make their own decisions.
Correct.
Yeah.
So next, I want to get into, so the purpose of this debate was to lay into the arguments that he had made in an article about Candace. And I want, and this is very important. I think it's very important for like the conservatives of the audience to see the dynamic here of the factions that are existing. And I would like pay very close attention to how they both can see something and it's like they're watching two different television screens, kind of, right? So this first one is, he put out the accusation that Candace said Hitler is okay. And this comes from, she was on a speaking tour with Charlie Kirk when she was working for Turning Point USA. And she made a point about nationalism, about how nationalism doesn't necessarily have to be a dirty word, but the reason why it's a dirty word in the public lexicon is because of Adolf Hitler. And so she uses that comparison. So I want to play that clip for you guys, and you guys can see it for yourself. And then we'll see on the way that he views that clip, because it's very telling.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree. I actually don't have any problems at all with the word nationalism. I think that it gets, the definition gets poisoned by elitists that actually want globalism. Globalism is what I don't want. So when you think about, whenever we say nationalism, the first thing people think about, at least in America, is Hitler. You know, he was a National Socialist, but if Hitler just wanted to make Germany great and have things run well, okay, fine. The problem is that he had dreams outside of Germany. He wanted to globalize. He wanted everybody to be German, everybody to be speaking German, everybody to look a different way. That's not, to me, that's not nationalism.
Okay.
So again,
so that's the clip. And then I want to jump to kind of them responding to it here.
But more importantly, and here's a piece of the anti-Semitism. Why bring one of the most evil men of history into the discussion? You could just as easily have given any negative examples of nationalism. You chose to bring Hitler on, not them.
I did, and I have no. If I could go backwards in the context of trying to understand why Americans think that nationalism is a bad word, it was appropriate for me to bring off Adolf Hitler. It is totally appropriate in any capacity when you are talking about history and historical sentiments to bring up any relevant character that has created those sentiments. So I just want to yes or no. After watching that, I want to make sure we don't run out of time here. After watching that in context, do you think it is fair that you wrote, she publicly said that Hitler was okay? Hitler was okay.
Yeah. Yes, by bringing me even into the conversation, yes, I do.
Okay, great.
Okay, moving on.
Wow. Okay, wait, hold on. So just by mentioning someone's name, a historical figure's name, that is now an endorsement of their character.
Yeah, because you could have brought up any other dictator and, nationalist or whatever. You could have done
fascinating. I mean, does he really believe this stuff?
Yeah, I think he believes that the manipulative ends that he used, meaning that he knows that what he said wasn't accurate, but it justifies the ends of language policing, of saying, if you can't bring this up or you might get punished for it, right? No matter how many qualifiers you put in front of it, if you bring it up in a discussion, we're willing to lie to you about it, right? We're willing to tell you an untruth in order to cast you in the wrong light, to police your language in such a way if you don't cover it right. And that's the interesting thing there. Is like I failed to understand, because Zionism is a breed of Jewish nationalism.
Mm-hmm.
He agrees
it's about an ethno-state
with nationalism. so he doesn't have a problem with nationalism, right? And if he was being a good faith actor, obviously what he would be doing would be saying, the best you could have done this in a positive light, right?
So what he's saying, he's not saying this, but I think your point is that he could be saying that he is relatively pro-nationalist, so he doesn't like to be associated with Hitler in this context of her saying Hitler was a nationalist.
Well,
also.
I mean, he wants nationalism for Israel. Does he want nationalism for America is the question.
And it's not even just that he wants nationalism. The Zionist movement is about developing an ethno-state. Like, remember Richard Spencer, white nationalist, ethno-states, that's supposed to be super bad, right? Like, in the Western mindset, that's supposed to be a terrible thing. Like, that is what the Zionist movement is about developing an ethno-state for Jews, right?
Yeah.
Like, important context there, too, right?
Right. So ethno-state means your state boundaries, the thing that makes up the state, should be your commonalities of your ethnicity, right? That idea is antithetical to the liberal idea, which is that our ideas should be what bind us together, not our ethnicities. We can have many, like a diversity of ethnicities within America. That's always what America's been. There was a commonality of, not even of the English language, right? That's kind of like a nationalist myth in America. But there was commonalities of like the rule of laws that we obeyed by, like when it comes to property rights and various different institutions that were fundamental and in the government and in the formal institutions. But that idea is since forever been a conflict in America, right? You've always had a nationalist pushback to immigration. You've always had these kind of conflicts. And then additionally, that even worse so, kind of buried under the response after World War II to the idea of nationalism. It became much harder to be a nationalist. Right?
Yeah.
Which, and this as an example, like that is exactly what happened. Nationalism is a dirty word because of Adolf Hitler. Like it's like I think that's true.
Right.
I don't even think
completely reasonable.
I don't think there's any debate about that.
Right.
Like,
And she even made it probably wasn't a good way to go about discussing this, right? She because she's taking a ton of heat on it. And honestly, the first time I heard it, I was like, that might not be the best way to explain that, but it was a straight up answer to the question. It's like, why can't we use this word? And she's like, well, because of Hitler. Yeah. What she negated to say, and I see where, let me actually try to steel man his side real quick. What she said, if he just would have kept his domestic policies in Germany, it probably would have been fine. What she wasn't thinking of when she said that, of course, was the Holocaust, which would have happened even if he hadn't invaded Poland. Probably.
Yeah.
Maybe not. We don't know. We can't run the world backwards, right?
Sure.
But, I mean, obviously, Jewish pogroms have been happening in Europe forever. He was already putting in people in work camps and stuff like that before he invaded Poland. Like, all those things are all real, too. So, from her experience as an American, and who says she has lots of Jewish friends, it was strange that she didn't mention that his internal policies were terrible too, right?
That's not the point of the discussion. That she's answering a question at an event,
right?
That has nothing to do with that. She's the question I believe from the audience was, why is it so dangerous to use the word nationalism? It was just like an audience member asking that question. Right. This is her response to it. So it had nothing to do with the Holocaust, right?
Yeah.
Well, and part of something that's very frustrating around
but the Holocaust is one reason why, right? Because it gets associated with nationalism, right?
Well, that's her point but she's just using Hitler itself, right? But
she's saying the only reason we don't like Hitler is because his foreign policy. That is true when it comes to the geopolitics. That's not the right word.
No.
International politics of the time.
No, I think this is getting muddy because the whole thing is the reason we don't like nationalism is because of Hitler. There wasn't a discussion on why we don't like Hitler or anything like that. It's why do we not like the word nationalism?
Yeah.
That is the point of the discussion. It had nothing to do with Jews. It had nothing to do with you could have used other people as examples, but I think the most prominent example to answer that very simple question is Hitler was nationalist, therefore nationalism bad. That is what in the Western lexicon of in the parlance of what we're allowed to say, that is kind of what exists there. It's the same reason why everybody was a Nazi for so long, in public parlance, because it's oh, you're an American nationalist, Nazi, right? Yeah. That is, and this is also that conversation was back from 2017, 2018,
right?
Too,
exactly the time when that was
when all that stuff was happening.
Yeah,
it's frustrating that you have to qualify so many things. You have to check all the boxes of I'm not saying this, not saying that before you get to actually say the very specific thing that you're saying. It's just. It's a challenge of our current state.
The next thing here is We got to talk about the innocent Palestinian children here.
It's not condemnation. And
Is
it's
it,
not
I'll just ask you a question.
extreme.
Is it sad?
Candace.
Is it
It's not
sad?
extreme.
Sure.
Sit there and do that.
I don't want to cut each other off, okay? Because clearly what we are having here is just a disagreement. There's no reason to get angry. Do you think it is sad when an innocent Palestinian child dies?
Candace, I cry every day. And it's not just for Israel. And this is one of the things you clearly do not understand. The same way most don't, who are anti-Semites, who don't get it. I cry for what's going on in Israel. I cry just as much for what we are forced to do. Golda Meir had a great quote. She said that one day we may be able to forgive them for killing Israeli children. We will never be able to forgive them for making us kill their children.
So what about my statement of saying that I also cry for Palestinian children is wrong to you if you also admit it is sad when Palestinian children die?
It's painful, but it is not in any way, shape, or form morally equivalent to October 7th. That is the anti-Semitic bigotry.
But I didn't say that. I just want to be clear. People are watching. It's just not what came out of my mouth. But I'm not gonna. I don't want to get hung up. I don't want to get hung up on that. I want to now point to. You said I wanted to talk about the depravities. I'm gonna quote it. She wanted to talk about the depravities of Hamas as an academic discussion. Actually, I was talking about NATO.
Yeah. But this goes into the unique evil element of. It's not the same because it's not part of the unique evil that was October 7th. There's actually, I didn't pull the clip from this, but there was a point in the debate where he was trying to get her into this like weird linguistic jujitsu about how October 7th was more uniquely evil than the Holocaust too.
I remember that part.
Like it was
very strange.
It was one of those things where you're like, okay, what do we like? It felt to me, it was just like, January 6th is the most tragic event in American history. Like, you know, like January 6th was way less tragic than October 7th in Israel, but like it felt the same. It was the same type of energy.
Here's the way it's the same energy. It's the forcing of a framework, right? It should be in a tolerant, normal society. We should be able to say, hey, look, you know, I see that these two things are a concern and that you judge one as being different than the other, but to me, they look very similar. So I want to understand why you think one is more uniquely evil, right? That seems like a reasonable discussion. But it's his insistence that she's a bad person if she doesn't adopt his framework. And that's what if you say someone is anti-Semitic because they don't suit your political goals or adopt your framework for interpretation of events, what you're trying to do is trying to punish them into adopting your framework.
Sure.
Right? And that's not a debate. Right, well, you've given up debate at that point.
Well, it's coercion by way of shame, effectively.
Right, especially if you're going after their job, like Shmuley did, and try to bankrupt them.
Yeah,
just like he's going after her job. The wasn't the title of his thing like, how long is the Daily Wire going to employ the anti-Semite Candace Owens or something like that? Like that is the.
I think you make a really good point.
The title.
Yeah,
I don't think
it was retracted. Like you can't actually even watch this was his article, but you can't even look at the
right. So that's the thing is like it's been tweets, it's been all kinds of things. It's been very public about it.
Yeah, I mean, and by getting to this place of name calling, of labeling her anti-Semitic for, you know, having the views that she has, which doesn't seem well founded in this case at all. It's not, you're right. It's not a good faith argument. It's not addressing the issue. It's ad hominem. It's attacking the person and their character because they disagree with you. And that is just a fallacy of argument that when it happens on any side of an issue.
Right.
It's no different to me than being like, oh, you like tax cuts? It's because you're racist.
Exactly.
You know, it's the same. This has nothing to do with that in any way, right?
It's more of a non sequitur there too.
And it's worse than that too. It's because of how you make me feel when you say it.
But
which you can't argue with. You can't argue against
was
how
a part of the definition that
yes.
he put in the beginning. It's a matters about the feelings of the time. He said it's a hate that mutates and it matters with the feelings of the time.
So to really quickly address that part of it. So the teleological trap is different than like Different like that definitions shouldn't change. Definitions do change over time as language transforms. That happens. That said, when you conveniently transform it to suit your political ends so that anyone who disagrees with you is a bad person by definition, that's when you're doing something dishonest and manipulative to the people you're supposedly having a good faith conversation with.
The last clip, because this goes back into the anti-Semitism, the last clip, and this was probably one of the more viral ones that came from it, was the use of the word hag.
Shh, you can't say that word.
Yeah, sorry. I guess I'm anti-Semitic. And the context of this is Candace Owens called Rabbi Shmuley, or he's the big famous rabbi. She called Rabbi Shmuley's daughter a hag.
And him an unholy rabbi.
Which them's fighting words too.
Before this, you said, how dare you call him an unholy rabbi because you're not Jewish? And she's just like, I don't know. The guy sells butt plugs. I think it's right. I think it sounds unholy to me. I'm not Jewish. I agree.
He's in a business relationship with his daughter for a sex shop. And it's also like, the more you look into Rabbi Shmuley, the more strange it gets. Like, you have a lot of prominent people in Hollywood that have put him on like enemies list of like, he is a very bad actor in the space. Michael Jackson did so. And he was Michael Jackson's spiritual advisor, right? Like Rabbi Shmuley is a very interesting actor, we will say.
Almost feels like we shouldn't even be saying his name.
Yeah.
Well, that
It's like
was,
Lord
Barclay's argument was because she called him Rabbi Shmuley while criticizing him, it made it anti-Semitic.
Right. It's like, why do you have to call him a rabbi? It was like, well, he calls himself Rabbi Shmuley.
So that was one of his arguments, and
it is weird too about this rabbi, because back during the Michael Jackson era, he used to always go by Rabbi Botich, and now he goes by Shmuley, which is his first name. It's like there's been like a brand change that's happened too over like a decade or two ago. There was a brand change that happened, which is just interesting. But here's the use of the word hag.
How dare you go into the misogynistic, the anti-Semitic trope of his hag daughter, something used throughout the late 18th and early through the early 20th century.
Sorry. Hag is now anti-Semitic?
So that is a term of his hag daughter that goes back into the witches of Eastern Europe. Why did you have to call her a hag daughter?
Just to be clear, because she's a witch. I think she's a witch. That's not because she's Jewish. I would call someone a hag of any color. I think she's a witch. What they have done over the last 2 years. I believe his daughter is a hag. I said that because that's what I believe. You may disagree with me on that, but to say that that's anti-Semitic is ridiculous. I would call any person a hag.
Candace, I'm going to be very clear without trying to be insulting. So please forgive me if it comes off wrong. Okay, it's not meant to.
No, it's fine. You can insult me.
I don't want to.
I've dealt with 2 years of a rabbi insulting me, so I'm totally cool with this. Yeah.
I have no desire to insult anyone. Okay? But do you understand, are you familiar with the history of the Grimm fairy tales and the folk tales of Eastern Europe?
I know that we can go back and we can also say
No. I'm asking a specific question.
Okay.
That the witch archetype of those fairy tales were specifically modeled and called the Jews. That the Jews of that part of the world were called hags and witches specifically because they didn't eat the same food. They had different practices, and they were excluded that way as part of the bloodline.
So you are saying that we can
by calling a rabbi's daughter a witch, a hag daughter, you have tapped into an anti-Semitic trope that goes back hundreds of years, whether you mean to or not.
Okay.
Now that I've told you that,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What do you guys think about that?
Apparently the definition of hag can't transform over time.
I would like to highlight, so after listening to that, now here's a tweet from Rabbi Shmuley, calling Candace Owens followers troglodyte, knuckle-dragging Neanderthal, anti-Semitic thug followers. And I just want to...
How does it feel to be called that, Bennett?
I just want to leave that.
It's pretty racist.
I just want to leave that there and make that think about that, right?
This is, to me, this is just like this argument has devolved so far from anything even remotely resembling productive. It's just name calling.
It's not supposed to be productive, right?
Well, and that's fair. That's fair. And frankly, to the hag question, I don't know the history of that. I have no reason to distrust his story. I assume he knows the history of that in Eastern Europe. So if that is an anti-Semitic trope and she did step in it by accident, like, well, okay, fair.
But the thing is, hag is used in parlance for more than just Jewish circles, of
course,
like Druidic circles and all these things.
And I think that most people don't know that history and don't use it with that context in mind.
It's another trap. Did you know that hag, blah, 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 right? Like whatever it is, I go back and I rewrite history from a certain lens that could have some tangible truth to it, but probably has a larger context that neither he nor she is an expert in, right? If you tell me the German root word, the etymology of hag, it was, let me see here, I look it up on Wikipedia, haguza, right? Which is derived from the Proto-Germanic hagutsun, which is has an unknown origin. The first element may be related to the word hedge, like hedge wizard, like
a bush.
Yeah.
Okay.
We don't know. There's a lot of things we don't know. So like in folklore, hag has been used forever in all over the world, all over Northern Europe. Baba Yaga, is a classic one. Lived in the woods on a house on chicken legs. And, like these sorts of like myths and stuff like that is related to all kinds of Old Testament stuff like Lilith in the Torah and the Old Testament, and other religions, including the Greek religion, which also spread with Christianity, all these other things that informed all this stuff. To say it's only that, to say it's only Jewish is I think a very narrow interpretation of probably a larger phenomena, because the archetype of the old wizened woman who lives out in the woods, I'm not sure it guarantees it in every circumstance was
purely Jewish.
Yeah, was purely Jewish or racialized. So he like makes this really strong claim to like a historical fact and now has to reconcile that. And as I look at it, I don't see the evidence, right? I mean, it could be there, but like how big of a deal was it? And then to trace that back to her intent because of this fact that Jews know that other people don't know means that she believes something that she says she doesn't believe and therefore is anti-Semitic.
Well, it's like what I said before. It all just reminds me of like critical race theory, queer theory, all the things that were going on in college campuses. It's the exact same type of thing. It's like, oh, you're walking on eggshells and you hit a trap and you're like, but did you know back in 1148 there was and then it turns into this emotionalism, and and those that were watching, you could see the emotionalism that's just like he does this thing where he does this like deep breath. He's just like.
He was very condescending.
And then, and then he goes into it, right? And then scholars say this, and you're just like, yes, I'm seeing the linguistic jujitsu that's happening right here. It's and people that are watching, like I recommend, and I especially recommend for conservatives, watch the entire thing in full. If you're trying to make up your decisions about like the narratives that have been formed around all of this, around her and the Daily Wire, around Israel, Gaza, like take a listen to it and just really digest the dynamic of this, because it's very telling from just like a narrative control standpoint.
Yeah. And for those of you that maybe have seen it already or haven't, just at this point in this conversation, we'd love to know your thoughts in the comments. Do you agree with Candace Owens, or do you think she is being anti-Semitic? Drop your thoughts in the comments and be civil, of course. Yeah.
And I just want to say the lead off on here, a major part of that episode was he was trying to get, he kept inviting Candace to watch the screening that the IDF put out a film on October 7th. So you have the Israeli Defense Forces put out a film on the events of October 7th, and it's supposed to highlight the cruelty of it. And it's a classic trick. You invite them in, you bring them in, and you kind of indoctrinate them into exactly your side of the narrative. And she agreed to it. She's going to do it, or she will, if they set it up, she will do it. But she wants to not just do that side of things. She also wants to talk to Gazans, and she wants to kind of get like a bigger picture of the entire thing as a whole. And she wants to bring on like Tucker Carlson with her, Glenn Greenwald with her, Dave Smith with her, and like kind of journalists that they think has like the public eye and support and have kind of won a bunch of hearts over to be able to see everything in full. I have a feeling that with I want to see all sides of it, I have a feeling they're going to be like, oops, we're not going to do it anymore, because this is a very classic tactic that is done, is bring them in, see your side of things, right?
It's also peculiar, and I get it from a point of view of like the that you don't want to give your enemies like the win of releasing these videos publicly. That said, the lack of a third-party vet is concerning to me, right? Like
on this documentary.
Yeah. Just what is in it? What is because there have been a lot of discussions back and forth from releases from the IDF to the press that have had to go back and be like, well, actually, over this time, and I'm not tracking it very closely, so I don't know what to believe. And I just want to I would like it if there were more clear vetting of this thing to make sure it's not a piece of propaganda, because, well, militaries create propaganda. That's what they do, right? So we should walk in with eyes wide open.
But David, you can't vet it, because if you wonder and you criticize, then you're anti-Semitic.
Well, that's part of the problem right here, right? You're kind of creating a trap that means that there's things you can't talk about, and once you do that, you cut out someone's tongue, the first thing everyone wonders is, what was that guy going to say? So you draw attention to it. It's like a Streisand effect.
Totally.
Right? So
what is the Streisand effect for those that don't know?
Streisand. What's her first name?
Barbara Streisand.
Barbara Streisand. Someone put a picture of her house on the internet, so she tried to have it taken down. So, of course, what happened is the blowback was
everybody wants to look at it.
Yeah.
And it circulated everywhere.
We're going to talk about like that when we get to the Gamergate issue, because it's all over the Gamergate issue.
Mm-hmm.
But that's kind of the Candace Owens saga on this thing. Very curious to see where she goes next. I know she said she's going to be taking a brief hiatus, but she is starting her own YouTube channel. Daily Wire owned her previous podcast YouTube channel, so she has to kind of start from scratch, but Tucker did the same thing, so we'll see where she ends up going here.
I'm sure she will have no problem pulling her viewers with her. I mean,
well, and just judging by the internet backlash on Daily Wire, seems like there's a massive amounts of support for Candace on this side. So.
Yeah. Once again, let us know where you fall on it. Are you on Team Candace, or are you on the other side? Very curious. Leave us a comment below, and also people on Spotify can comment as well. We've got there's a little let us know what you think of this episode, so go ahead and drop us a note there as well.
If you are on Team Candace, though, you are in fact anti-Semitic. So.
Just be aware of
so
that.
Choose wisely.
You're also probably racist.
If you are a small business owner looking for exponential growth, you have to connect with Adam Thuen at Intellectual Patriots. He will revolutionize your business game and help you get to the next level. Adam can streamline your business practices and advertising strategies to improve your bottom line. His expertise in data engineering means he can build you the systems you need to collect and analyze market data. His mission is to provide you with invaluable insights to fuel your success. From grant writing and business proposals to digital systems integrations, even AI management, Intellectual Patriots is a one-stop shop for cutting-edge solutions. Don't wait another second. Visit intelpatriots.com to learn more. That's INTEL Patriots.com. This episode is brought to you by Revved Up Promo, the official apparel partner of Human Reaction. Revved Up is a premier full-service shop specializing in laser engraving, screen printing, and embroidery. Not only are they now making all of our apparel right down the road from us, they can do the same for your brand and ship it to you anywhere in the world. Revved Up helps you navigate the extensive universe of merch options and uses state-of-the-art techniques to showcase your brand in its very best light. So if you want to support our show and our generous sponsor, you can now do so by buying our merch and by turning to Revved Up Promo for your own custom apparel needs. Reach them at revveduppromo.com. That's with 2 V's and 2 P's, or just check the show notes for a link. Well, if you weren't already classified as some terrible stereotype from that piece, you might be transphobic if you care about this next one.
Yeah, so Riley Gaines was on the JRE, the Joe Rogan Experience this week. And I have to ask you, there's a lot of trans stuff happen this week. And it does seem to me that we might be getting to peak trans. That we've kind of crested the hill, officially jumped the shark, and we're going to start going on the downslide. In part because of Riley and what she brings up here, but also some other developments have happened in parallel. And lastly, the WPATH Files release.
Yeah.
Riley Gaines is a swimmer. She was competing against Leah Thomas, who is the now infamous swimmer from Penn State, I believe, who is a trans woman. However, as she gets into, Leah Thomas had some interesting things that came out, at least from this conversation, that I think people will be interested to hear. Is there more you want to add to this?
Yeah, and it tells a story a little bit.
Yeah.
Yep.
Off of what his teammates have told me and what really has been public knowledge based off what they post and different things. At the time of that national championships, he was still dating women and active with women.
Sexually. So obviously has testosterone.
Yes. But now, again, based off of social media, he is engaged to another man who claims to be a woman. So 2 men, but they call themselves lesbians. So who knows? But yes.
But at the time. So
Yeah.
if you're on that team, you're a woman and you have a biological male who's intact, who's having sex with women, walking around naked in the locker room with women. And if you're uncomfortable with that, you should educate yourself.
You
and
said
learn how to use she, her pronouns and accept defeat
You said it.
to this person that's not a woman.
You said it.
And the whole idea behind Title IX was supposed to be to protect women's sports. It was supposed to be to have a place where women can compete fairly against women.
Yeah.
And because of this insane cult that 45% of the country's in, or whatever it is, you have to deal with this literal mental patient in a woman's sport dominating, and everyone's cheering.
Yes.
And everyone around it that's watching.
Yeah, so it was a very interesting conversation. Got into her whole background. There's actually a point where she ties with Leah Thomas, and then they only have 1 trophy, although they technically should have had 2. So they give it to Leah just for the public optics, and she reveals that, and it's very clear that the goal was to make them look inclusive so that they could get the social credit of doing so. Whether or not it's actually tied to DEI or ESG or stuff like that, unsure about, but it was definitely a media marketing play to show that the NCAA was tolerant.
Yeah.
Yep.
Interesting also to note, adjacent to that, she notes that the person that was having this conversation with them after the race, sort of in private behind the podium, seemed to eventually kind of drop the facade or their guard on the issue, and seemed remorseful that the situation had come to that, or, that she was being deprived of something that she had obviously worked tremendously hard for. And for people that don't understand or haven't listened to this episode, I mean, she's a Division I collegiate athlete. I mean, she, like many athletes in any sport,
champion.
Train just immensely hard to do what they do. And she was at the top of her field.
She tied a dude.
She tied a dude. And that's not
Dudette.
Well,
A
we
lady
don't need to
dude.
go into the details.
A lady dude.
We don't need to go into the details.
Dude,
will
lady
say,
dude might be our turn of art for the podcast.
Watching Joe do the math in his head of two guys equaling a lesbian, he's like, wait.
I mean, it's just. I hope it's peak woke, because it's more confusing than anything.
Well, yeah,
for
I mean,
me.
it's that. I mean, the other side of it is what I thought was interesting and compelling about that was the moment where you connect the dots to. It's one thing just to see this guy as a person in transition, right, into being a female, and he wants acceptance of that sort of thing. That sort of narrative that might or may not be true. It's another one when you realize that there is definitely something very uncomfortable in the Western individualist mindset that says, like, you got a women's locker room with a naked dude walking around who is straight.
Yeah.
At that moment, there's sex and nudity and things like that are connected because of course they are, right? And that there's something about that really is very, it's hard to look at or think about as a person that's acting in good faith without going like, okay, I kind of get where you're coming from here. You know what I mean? So anyways, that kind of set up a lot of other dynamics that happened this week. Additionally, the NXXT women's golf tournament banned trans athletes from their tournament. Now, there's lots of other ones. They get into some of the other sports than what, various different sports are dealing with it differently. But I guess the question is, maybe a question for the comments is it strange that the vector that made the biggest difference probably in the space was women's sports and protecting it that got us to peak woke? I mean...
I think it's interesting that I think transgenderism has made people a lot more interested in women's sports than they were previously.
Well, I think there's an element here too, is because we've had we've had the TERFs for a while, which would be like J.K. Rowling. She's kind of like one of the people that's big on this, but TERF is trans exclusionary radical feminists. So you have people that are radical feminists, but they exclude the trans stuff and the entire idea is, you have a bunch of dudes trying to be women, and this is like a women's movement, and you're kind of stepping in on our territory. It's not the same thing, and they're trying to exclude them from that thing. And so I think when it comes to women's sports, like women's sports would be a prime turf domain, right? Because it's like, no, this is supposed to be something special for women. Like we're just competing with women. We're not competing with men. We're not competing with anybody else. It's women competing against each other and having a competitive spirit, and so on.
Yeah.
So I think it makes a lot of sense that college and probably college sports too is probably a big indicator here. But
I think that's even the more important tier of competition to be looking at, because a tremendous amount of academic scholarships are granted through sports, right? And if all of a sudden you've got a previously biological male with a totally different physiology coming in and competing and beating out biological women for these spots, they're going to be deprived of educational opportunities, which is like not, I don't think, the mechanism that anybody wants to be generating in this instance. That's just me. But
was Riley Gaines the one we covered back in like probably late September, where she was trying to make October 10th
Yes.
real Women's Day or
Yes,
something like
that's
that?
correct.
Because XX
Right.
double
I
chromosomes.
forgot about that.
Yeah,
That was
I
a
think,
thing.
I think you guys had Kat on that day.
Yeah.
I think that was when I was gone. I was in Europe when that was happening. Yeah.
That's the same thing with the tennis thing happened, right?
well, is that the context of NXXT women's golf?
Oh, I didn't see that. The double X. I don't know.
Because that would make
That would make sense.
more sense if they're banning transgender athletes, I guess.
Right.
Well, so all this kind of set up. Dave, do you want to go into the WPATH Files?
The WPATH Files also dropped this week. So our boy, the best reporter in America,
Yeah, honestly.
a
probably.
former environmental activist,
former George Soros guy.
former George Soros guy, Michael Schellenberger. doesn't quite drop his name, but he is killing it. From the Twitter files to
He's on everything.
The stuff with Epstein that he did a really great reporting on Epstein and with all that, and now on the WPATH Files. So
What is WPATH?
it is the
World Professional Association of Transgender Health.
And we're going to get into that in a second. He summarizes what's in the files, but basically his organization got these files from someone within WPATH, which hosts like an online forum where you see a lot of professionals talking to each other and talking to activists. Very interestingly, is a large part of who is actually in WPATH is both like theorists of queer theory as well as physicians talking about transgender health. And here's this kind of quick summary of what they found from the files.
Seems to be a very interesting, somewhat groundbreaking piece of evidence. I think my first question to you would be around how do we juxtapose this with what the National Institutes of Health, the NIH, has to say about the vital importance of gender medicine, noting that it improves mental health care, it improves health and well-being, particularly of transgender young people, those who are non-binary, and others who are at higher risk for things like suicide and hate crimes.
Yeah, sure. Well, that's a great question. I mean, and that's one of the questions that people are going to have to answer over the next coming years or decades. This is something that's been endorsed by most major medical organizations. But when you lift the hood and you look underneath what's going on, what you find is that these organizations are relying on this organization called the World Professional Association of Transgender Health. And when we look at those files, which includes both these written files, but also videos, you see that the doctors, surgeons, therapists, and others that are involved in it, they admit that the parents and the kids do not understand that they are facing lifelong sterility as well as potentially a significant loss of sexual function. They don't understand these treatments, and that's called informed consent, which is right up there with do no harm. And so I think this is a really, a violation of medical ethics. They're also claiming that there's this evidence, but in fact, it's not scientific evidence. It's not evidence that's based on, properly controlled studies over time. The most shocking thing, one of the most shocking things, there's a lot of shocking things in there, is the ways in which they don't actually follow up with their patients. In other words, you'll see surgeons say, well, as far as we know, these things have gone well, or we don't know after 6 months. So you don't have a proper long-term study. And we do now know there's been several studies now debunking this claim, this false claim that somehow suicide risk is higher if you don't do these radical interventions. It appears as though quite the opposite is the case, and that there's a huge amount of regret And much of what we see in the WPATH files are doctors and therapists dealing with detransitioners, dealing with people experiencing serious regret about the loss of their ability to have children or about their ability to achieve sexual function in the ways that most people are able to.
Yeah, I want to follow.
So that reporter that asked that question, the very loaded question, is Amisha Cross. So just so you know, who does this stuff with Rising on occasion. So that's what's in the files. It is fascinating to watch these discussions happen, and it raises a lot of really important questions for exactly what he brought up. When do we have real consent, and can you convince a 14-year-old they understand the consequences of losing their ability to have children for the rest of their life if they take these pills? In this case, puberty blockers.
The fraudulent nature of this, it was, while he was talking, it was making me think of the what was it, the hoax, James Lindsay, Peter Boghossian, Helen Pluckrose. It was I can't remember what it was called, but they basically went in and they just to prove a point on how degraded the academic like peer review process was. They went in and just started like making up texts, and they were getting awards for their studies on things. They would do like dogs in parks promoting rape culture, things like that.
It's called grievance
study hoax.
Yeah, grievance studies affair.
Yeah,
so it's called the Skokel. It's called the Skokel hoax, which is a very classic technique used to test academic journals by basically slipping in fake stuff to see what they can catch.
Yeah, and it just, this whole thing makes me think of that, because it comes into like the queer theory, the critical theory, all this postmodern stuff that is perpetuating through academia right now. Like there's definitely ties there thematically. There.
I mean, to me, the biggest bombshell that I just heard is that the research that has been rolled out to substantiate the need for gender affirming care, that being that untransitioned people with gender dysphoria are predisposed to higher rates of depression, suicide, and other things, that's backwards. That's false. In fact,
it may be the other way, right? We always got to caveat that, because these are aggregate studies, right? Any individual could fall within either side of that.
Sure.
The question is how do you make the determination on the individual? And they can't even make up their minds about that. One of the crazy things about this, Joe, is they have someone who's experienced active psychosis, active hallucinations while getting consulted about whether or not to do bottom surgery. And they're like, should we do bottom surgery on this person? Can this person consent? And it's like, of course. What are you talking about? They have voices in their head. They're like,
yeah.
How do you, like, that shouldn't be a question. There was a detachment somewhere in this process where it became, at least to these people, such a important treatment that they've kind of left some core parts of medicine behind.
Right.
Such as, can this person consent?
Do they have like agency to actually be able to understand the ramifications of that? But I mean, moreover, we know that the human brain isn't done developing until 25. So, and we intentionally don't allow kids.
Might even be later.
Might be later. But we don't allow kids to do certain things like smoke cigarettes or drink alcohol until much later for those reasons.
Congratulations on developing, Kyle.
I think my brain is now peak brain.
You're right. That's right. That's always been the debate is this child abuse? Is this that sort of question that the state should step in on? Even if you just leave all that, what's the role of the government beside the important question of when can someone consent? Talking to someone about like, what is puberty like before they've hit puberty, right? It's what I call a blind corner. Right. When you enter into a room, you'll have something where you cannot see around until you take the step, until you move into the room. When you're clearing a room, for example, when you're looking through the room and you're like taking a strategic view of it, you have this ever increasing blind corner as you turn all the way around. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the problem there is there are some things you cannot know until you do them, until you get on the other side of them. Like try talking to a 10-year-old or a 9-year-old about puberty. They're like, what? Like they just can't consent. And then when they're in the middle of it, you're having these experiences, you're having these things that are changing. And there's like, oh, okay, I can put what I'm experiencing to words now. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. But until you hit that blind corner, you can't conceptualize it. Another one, having kids is exactly the same way, especially in my experience for men. For men, if you talk to a guy who's never had kids, what it's like to be a father, they're like, it's a blank, they literally say this in it, a blank wall. right? Talking to a 14-year-old what it's like to never be able to have kids, of course, is like talking to a blank wall, right? Because they're like, kids are gross. Kids are like, It's different when you're in your 20s.
Yeah.
Right? It's just different. And then even when you're 25 and you want to have kids, to know what it's actually like to be a parent is completely different. Right? It's a blind thing that you cannot get into until you see that little thing that's you, but made again. It's a most spiritual experience you can have in life. So one of the questions here is, can you effectively do that? And a lot of this is doctors actually struggling with that. And then, of course, not changing a single thing about what they're doing, right? And it's everything from 14-year-olds, like 14-year-old pro doctors, to like, can someone with dissociative disorders, right? They dissociate, like they blank out. Schizophrenia. Someone with schizophrenia was an open question. Should we do these major procedure? And then depressive disorders apparently is very common. Like all of them are talking about these people having depressive disorders.
Post-transition?
No,
Or
like
pre.
like when they're in their internet. And then like one of the things is,
Which might be a factor, right?
Yeah, and people with complex post-traumatic disorders, right? So here's the interesting thing to pull at that I think we have to reconcile. If someone has a major, psychological issue, and you're like, well, we're going to do a medical intervention that could impact your entire life. When do we draw the line of saying, like, you're just too psychologically damaged to make this decision well, right? When should the doctor do that?
Yeah.
And what it seems to be that this WPATH Files reveal is, one, that these are questions that they are grappling with, and then kind of ignoring and continuing doing their thing. Right. At least that's what it seems like. And there's a lot of people who are involved in this conversation who aren't medical doctors at all, who are just there to advocate for the community, who are somewhat determining the path of how these decisions are being made. So they're not being made as WPATH calls themselves, which is science-based and like factual-based, based upon like hard science.
Well, and yeah, science has been so politicized because you have in the DSM-5, they changed the naming of gender identity disorder, and they changed it to dysphoria. And that's a very purposeful thing because we want to destigmatize it, all this stuff, right? But what does that actually end up doing in practice? It ends up starting to pathologize, really, because it's much more of an acceptance. It's much more of you're trying to get society to be more accepting. But you have a lot of people here who are struggling with depression, schizophrenia, all these things that are just like, maybe this will fix me. And then you have everybody being like, yeah, that'll fix you. I'm sure you'll feel better after that. And then you have all these horror stories of all these suicides going on. And you have like people who have transitioned that are activists saying, don't transition, right? And we're seeing the backlash of it. Europe was way ahead of us on this. They're years ahead. They've started to kind of pull back a lot of these things.
So actually this week, the National Health Service banned the use of puberty blockers, except for in like very dire circumstance. So like the common use of them. The London Times came out in behalf of it.
Oh, interesting.
Is saying this is that the gender surgery was, quote, quack medicine, quoting the WPATH, the London Times. That's a huge deal. So another one is, okay, so part of it's like infertility. Some of it is like after these surgeries, explaining to someone that it's very possible. And what's interesting here is because like in the debates around this time, you'll have a lot of people who say like, well, that's not true. Or there's like a complicating study or something like that. And it's true some of the times, and we just struggle with numbers and statistics as a society, right? But these doctors are saying, hey, when the doctors are talking about it, when no one else is listening, when it's not a political issue, when it's just the doctors and the activists talking, he says, this person has schizophrenia and is homeless. How do I explain to them that the thing I'm about that they're agreeing to might make it so they can never have another orgasm again in their life? Yeah. They're schizophrenic and homeless. And I don't know what their answer is. I'm just saying that should be a debate. Because I feel somewhat culpable at some point right here as a society if we let that happen without any amount of debate.
Yeah. I mean, and good question for the group and for folks listening. Let us know in the comments, at what point are we responsible for these decisions, for not, putting a stop to things that people believe to be or know to be wrong based on the moral structure of the society we live in, right? Because I mean, there are like real contract law questions here around, agency and consent, and do you have the faculties necessary to engage in this agreement, and then who's liable for that in the aftermath?
And you're making decisions off of what seems to be faulty and fabricated data.
Right.
Or at least politically motivated interpretations of data. Like for another one is for a very long time. Okay, so I've done a little bodybuilding. I've done a little bit of that world, right?
David's a little thick.
He's a little thick. Yeah, you were surprised to learn how much I weigh earlier. I'm like,
I got a ways to go.
Is that hormone supplementation has an association with cancer, right? This is known. Like when you talk to other guys who do large amounts of TRT or D-bol or other kinds of anabolic steroids, it's known that these sorts of things happen. Some people will take them for decades and have no real adverse side effects. Some people will take them at incredibly high rates for a very long time and still be around. Other people will take them once and get liver cancer. That just happens. So like how the body responds is a lot on the individual way we don't really understand. So it's all done with like this risk factor and statistical likelihood, right? But when you talk about it when it comes to trans, you're like, well, what about the cancer risk? They're like, well, there's a total freak out of like, well, you can't bring that up. Well, in the WPATH, they're talking about it honestly. And it much more patterns closely to what you experience from men taking steroids and the potential secondary order consequences.
And what is the probability there? Are there any numbers behind?
I don't have them off the top of my head, but it's just known. It's just known that there's a risk here, right?
Yeah.
And like in the political dialogue about this, things about giving supplemental hormones to children, we're like, well, it's kind of up to the parents and the adults, and like the medical professionals can negotiate this. And when people say, well, what about the cancer risk? They're like, hey, it's not for you to decide. Right? It's like, well, wait a minute, we should probably have a discussion about this.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that necessarily that there is a government solution here, but at minimum, we need to have an honest discussion, and that can't start with, if you don't have the right conclusion in mind when you start out, we can't have a discussion. So
how as a society should we handle post-operation regret?
That's a great question.
Because a lot of it is kids being teenagers, getting kind of talked into doing it for whatever reason because you feel a certain way. And, there's there's a big cult phenomenon that exists here where you're kind of part of the group. And, it just seems to be like, in different areas that you are, it's always like, oh, this person has a friend and they both have kids that are transgender, like there's a social behavioralism that is existing in here. And then you have these, kind of these famous regretters now coming out. Like, how should that be handled? Because like if you have it done when you're a kid and are you consenting to it, like there becomes like weird legal questions that have to be had, like who should be held responsible? Should people be held responsible?
I think medical professionals have needed to really apply a lot of scrutiny to this issue. Not to say that many haven't, but some are certainly, I think, probably overstepping the first do no harm piece of the Hippocratic Oath and not thinking about those things. And maybe some of that is by the nature of the fact that they're working within a system where they don't feel they have the flexibility or they don't have the fortitude to stand for that, or they're going to lose their job if they don't do X, Y, or Z. I don't mean to excuse the behavior. I think that it's up to every individual, regardless of the corruption within a system, to really strongly weigh the moral bit against their own compass and say, is this something that's right that I should be doing? But I do think that you're right. There's a lot of, it's a contagion effect here, I think, throughout many layers of society, where we're willfully blinding ourselves to some of these blind corners that exist. They don't have to be blind necessarily. At very least, we don't need to approach them with naivete, right? We can understand that there are risks inherent that we should be considering.
I think this is an extreme example of a much broader problem that also exists. Yeah. And it's the entire field of like psychology and psychiatry just being corroded. Like, because you have all these people, they go to the psychiatrist and it's like, oh, what's your problems? And it's like, oh, well, here's a pill for that, And instead of actually handling the much deeper lying issues that are happening, it's just like, oh, maybe there's a surgery for that. Maybe you take this SSRI. And if you look at the stats of how many people are on SSRIs, like we have a very depressed empire right now. Everybody's depressed. Everybody's on antidepressants right now. It's
very strange.
It's terrible. Like the amount of people I know that are on SSRIs, I'm very anti-SSRI.
Well, there, like you say, there are much deeper societal, cultural questions that need to be explored to try to get to the root cause of that too. But I mean, it's synonymous with everything, right? It's treat the symptom, not the cause. That's the way our culture works these days. I feel like at many different levels. But I am curious. What do you think, David?
How to handle post-op regret?
Yeah.
Oh man, that is at least one thing that I know some states have done is they've removed the liability for doctors in lawsuits for post-op regret, which puts it on them to very carefully own their actions to make sure they are only giving these surgeries to people who absolutely know them and are unlikely to regret them.
They've removed liability protection?
Yes, because most medical procedures have quite a few legal protection layers of liability.
Yeah.
So is that a good idea? Well, in a free society, in general, you wouldn't have those sorts of legal layers of protection. Liability governs where regulation usually fails to govern. And always the question is, if you just ban it, then you create just a perverse incentive for people to go around those bans and to then move those kids out of state or do things like what happened in Montana with Jordan Peterson actually interviewed that couple. Yeah. Even a private actor can be in this kind of strange place where they have this power to remove children.
Yeah.
Not to mention CPS and the powers that they have. So once you've opened the can of worms, that is that the state has a higher claim on your kids than you do, you just run into all these problems. At least one of the ways to solve that in a free society manner and a non-regulate from the government regulation, like positive, going to tell you how to raise your kid manner, is to remove the liability for the person doing the procedure.
Sure.
Because then they have the right incentive.
What liability should parents have?
That's an interesting question. Yeah, should children be able to sue their parents for allowing them to make a bad decision when they're kids?
I mean, we've talked about this before, right? Yeah. I mean, kids are not entirely fully fledged citizens. They don't have all the rights that an adult, sovereign individual does in the sense of, a citizen. They're under their parents' guidance. They're supposed to be the guardian, right? The adults are in the room. So if they're allowing their own cultural biases, their own, neuroses, perhaps, to be projected onto their children and causing
the friggin' frog's gay.
Well played.
Yeah.
Well played. Causing irreparable damage.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, that's something where it's like, as a parent, you would have to be just so careful there.
Well, and there becomes a question there too, because really this becomes a battle of narratives. Because is it child abuse to enable your kids to do this, or is it child abuse to not go with their feelings? And there becomes because either side would argue one is child abuse and or the other one is. So you become this.
Everyone's trying to defend the kids here. This is from what, right? And that's where I think the more cautious side probably wins out, is once you get into question what's child abuse, is very clearly that, hey, just wait until you're done with puberty and then see if you still feel like transitioning. It seems like a very reasonable place to be, and why it's picking up so much steam and why we're probably getting to peak trans, in my theory. Because of that question. It's just like, as the evidence piles up, as the kind of collaboration between activism and science to create a narrative that feels very much like COVID can become a problem, right? Because you just have someone who's doing appeals to authority based upon an institution like WPATH. It is untrivial to note the WPATH Files' significance because so much of our institutions point to them as the experts who are telling us why these are good surgeries to do, why these are good things
Which
to do.
We've seen that happen in scientific stuff over and over and over and over and over again.
Well, and it should also be noted that they're incredibly profitable as well.
There's a perverse incentive on the other side, which is another reason for the liability thing, right? Because the profit has to be born with risk. If you have profit but no risk, you have the potential and opportunity for abuse.
If you have profit, no risk, you're Pfizer.
Right. So in the absence of risk from profit liability, then you beg regulation.
Yeah.
So that's the thing, is like the very people who would fight the liability question are the people who don't want to be regulated. So what they want is all the profit with none of the risk and none of the potential liability.
Yeah. What do you think? People in the chat, let us know. Should parents be liable? Should doctors be liable? How do we handle post-op regret in this country?
Okay, so we got, honestly, after that very serious 2 topics, we have our less serious topic, which is
I don't know. This is a pretty serious topic
of Gamergate.
There is a war on gamers.
Are you a repressed minority now?
I think you and I are both gamers. Bennett's a gamer. We're an oppressed minority.
Yeah. How's it feel to be in a podcast with 3 minorities?
I feel just honored, blessed. You guys are all stunning and brave, and I'm
Stunning
really
and brave.
It's true.
I'm humbled by your presence.
You
really.
don't understand the hardships that we've had to go through in our lives.
Yeah.
Well, I am Irish, so I think actually maybe I count too.
No.
I don't think you should. I don't think you should
hates
assume
you.
you understand our pain.
That's how it works. All right. So first up,
Touché.
background. Gamergate 1.0. What was it? Let's get into it. So we don't want to actually watch this.
Do we want to? No, let's not do it.
It is a great primer, but I can't recommend enough Sargon by Rucka Rucka Ali. That song will really tell anyone what actually
It's a
happened.
parody of Starboy, like but it showcases like the original beginnings of Gamergate.
Can we play it underneath me explaining the backstory?
I don't like. There's fair. Like I don't think
He's not gonna copyright
Rucka
us.
Rucka. He wouldn't. But like we're gonna get like a flag. It's not.
That's
worth
true.
It.
This guy
We should
gets
just
kicked off
link-
YouTube
we
like
should
every
just
other
link
week.
it in the
Link
show
to
notes.
like
Put it in.
Rucka's best
Check
song
it out.
ever.
He's the best. All right, so late 2013, right? A long time ago, 10 years ago.
I just got out of high school.
In a galaxy far, far away.
This game developer named Zoe Quinn releases a video game called Depression Quest. Doesn't that sound like something you want to play?
So exciting. So exciting.
Yeah, Depression Quest. Everyone who tries it out hates it. But
Imagine that.
it is ranked well by all the gaming news, like how innovative it is and how it explores depression. It's all very laptop class. Like, oh, this is a really revolutionary thing.
Everything you would expect from like critical reviews in like mainstream media sources happens in the gaming industry.
Yes, yeah. So her brand, Zoe Quinn, to kind of understand her, and I linked on the right hand side there, her profile on Twitter. I'm getting a grip on who I'm talking about. Is that she's a small video game developing woman.
Important.
And she is obviously treated, by a lot of gamers, like, she's obviously treated with, and like other people in the development part of the gaming industry, she gets the kid glove treatment by the press, by that fact, even though her games kind of suck, right? That's the idea. So Zoe gets a review taken down from a small YouTube page. So a small YouTube page has got like, a little more subscribers than we do. It's got a couple thousand subscribers, and it's over here, and it does a review of Depression Quest, and it's like, this is hot garbage, right? And she does a copyright infringement request to get it taken down. This guy who reviewed her game, obviously screenshots it, puts out a thing and says, this chick just took down my video, which was doing okay, and is trying to keep me from criticizing her game. She's suppressing my, all this kind of stuff, using YouTube to suppress my free speech. And guess what takes hold? This Streisand effect. So everyone starts looking at her and her games. And it kind of blows up a little bit, like this controversy over that. So a dude who she was dating releases a blog post that accuses her, while all this, like, she starts getting this attention of sleeping with 5 other dudes while she was dating him. One of the people on the list of the dudes she was sleeping with was a Kotaku, which is a major game review website, reporter who reviewed her games and gave them great scores. So his reporter, the guy's name was Nathan Grayson. Other connections, including the editor of Polygon, Ben Katura, was financially supporting her on Patreon. So Polygon is another game reviewer. He's the editor, and he is financially giving her money on her Patreon while his website is reviewing her games. Right. So this brings up a big conversation on ethics and journalism. Patricia Hernandez is another person, kind of like Zoe, she's a reporter at Kotaku, is also sleeping with another female developer and reviewing her game. So that also comes out of this. So like all these revelations on integrity in this stuff.
Nerds are dirty. Nerds are kinky.
they're getting out.
I'm realizing some new stuff here.
So there's a consumer boycott that happens, and Adam Baldwin, like the actor, Adam Baldwin creates the hashtag Gamergate hashtag.
One of the lesser known Baldwins.
Yeah. Milo Yiannopoulos and Mike Cernovich springboard off of that hashtag into stardom. Like that's how they got their
That's how
career
Cernovich became a thing?
And Milo Yiannopoulos.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Which I don't know what happened to that guy. Anyways, so
he got canceled.
I don't. I'm just kidding. He said something about priests and he's out. So the right wing
he had a relationship with a priest when he was young, and it turned his homosexuality, is what he said.
Oh.
Yeah,
he said that on Rogan.
Well, we shouldn't get off into those weird.
It's all about round the clock sex. It's all, come on, man.
Yep.
Perfect.
Exactly.
So there's now like, since these two right wing figures kind of got involved, there's like a huge right wing, left wing split that happens that like now people have to kind of pick sides, and it's like more conservative. And if it starts out as like this question of ethics in gaming journalism, then becomes a culture war, right? Once those guys get involved. And it's really a question of like, how to deal with female developers. And then additionally to that, it becomes how to deal with like the problem in gaming. So here's where the pivot happens. All the gaming press attacks their own readers and consumers all at the same time with the same narrative of the death of the gamer as an identity, the gamer identity, all within days of the same theme. Their narrative was that gamers are dumb misogynists and the good guys have to enjoy their product despite being, despite this, right? So commentators, this is where Anita Sarkeesian comes into the picture. And developers like Quinn, who are trying to make the video games more inclusive and less bigoted, right, are being attacked. And that's why the gamer identity has to die. So the template is written by a lady named Leah Alexander. These names are going to come back around, so bear with me there. So Zoe, Anita, Leah. You need to so basically the message is you don't need to write articles for gamers anymore. So this is the media talking to the media again, of course, in public on the magazines meant to be read by gamers. They're talking to each other about how they don't have to write, make games or write articles for gamers anymore.
So all the gamers are just like watching this like lob back and forth, talking about them.
It's funny because like I see a note that you have in here, David, is that it feels very much like the Great Replacement theory.
It is,
but like inside the gamer industry. Well, and this was the thing is like
racist.
All this was going on. All this was going on. I was working a lot with like college students in politics, and the amount of college kids that are like Gamergate radicalized me. Like this was a massive cultural, like people that started to identify as conservatives and libertarians is like, I didn't care about politics. And then they came after my video games.
Yeah. So
like as a cultural phenomenon, it cannot be understated how much of a big cultural phenomenon this had for the right.
Actually on both sides in a lot of ways. So, the narrative is that you don't need gamers to do gaming anymore. We need to make gaming more inclusive and allow for females, and we can't over-sexualize characters, and sex is good in some certain sense and some is bad because of the male gaze. It gets into all of this social justice warrior stuff, especially that's really what Anita Sarkeesian brings into the picture as like an advocate and someone running a YouTube channel called Feminist Frequency.
Worth mentioning on just this circles back to Candace Owens. Anita Sarkeesian is one of the reasons why Candace Owens got big.
Yes,
is because when Candace Owens, there was this controversy that happened where there was like this governor's son, it was like the governor of Connecticut's son, and a bunch of his like friends all got really mad at her when they were like in high school, and they started like hitting her with like really racist stuff, and it blew up as this really big thing. And Anita Sarkeesian came to Candace Owens is like, this is how you use this for your victimhood, and you start to elevate yourself. Like this is like
you can monetize this to become, famous.
Yeah, it's like that's what this Anita Sarkeesian character is kind of embodies.
I think we kind of talked about it in our GTA episode.
Yeah, because Gamergate came up.
Episode 50. Go back and check it out.
Yeah. One of our best episodes.
Oh yeah. So at
Gamers
that point,
one of the best.
It turns out many of these journalists were actually coordinating using a mailing service to release things all at the same time and decide how games are being covered and decide scores on games and decide who gets to join the gaming journalism clique.
Media collusion?
Yes.
I don't believe it.
Actual media collusion. And the listserv was leaked to the public. And so they got to see who exactly was in it and what they were saying.
Okay, that's juicy.
Yeah. So that blows it to a whole new level. Gamers, and I want to specifically mention two guys who really became kind of like the symbol of like the YouTuber gamer reviewer who was, medium sized, making some money on it, but not huge. And then also, was well respected was Total Biscuit was his name.
Rip, by the way.
Rest in peace. He died of
cancer.
He's actually what got me into Gamergate. It was actually his coverage way back in the day. And Sargon of Akkad, who really became kind of like the gamer of the right, sort of, while Total Biscuit was more like the neutral guy who just wanted to see more ethics in gaming journalism.
And Sargon of Akkad has very much entered the political space, got banned from all sorts of platforms, was running for office in the UK. He's become a very big right-wing UK political figure now. Yeah. He's kind of
it's interesting.
in that stuff.
So versus Anita Sarkeesian. So it was really those two and other kinds of YouTube gamer dudes versus Anita Sarkeesian and gamer women too. They have this lead of feminism in games that they're kind of trying to contrast to say there's a larger woke issue going on. And that's when it's drawn into the public as a harassment campaign against Anita Sarkeesian. So it's interesting here. Everything starts out with Zoe Quinn, but it ends up being sucked into the orbit of Anita Sarkeesian and her relationship with the traditional media that covers it. And you can find it today. If you Google Anita Sarkeesian Gamergate, we're going to find is ABC News covering it as a harassment campaign by gamers because she's a woman. That's it. That's all you get from the coverage. It doesn't mention anything about Zoe Quinn sleeping with 5 dudes. It doesn't mention anything about gaming journalism ethics. Interestingly, Kotaku and Polygon changed their journalism ethics standards based upon this, early on and during the Gamergate thing. Gamers actually got what they wanted, which was, a supposed change of the ethics, although very little has actually changed in gaming. They got what they wanted out of it. But the larger population, all they heard was that the incel nerds were going after girls for gaming. That creates another Not Your Shield movement, hashtag Not Your Shield, which was all of these women and minority gamers coming out saying, no, it's not just white dudes. We don't like woke gaming either. We don't want tokenized characters. We want nuanced characters who happen to be black or Asian or women or whatever. So to this day, it's still covered as a harassment campaign. In fact, in the last week, Gamergate 2.0 has blown into the mainstream a little bit, and every coverage is what was once a harassment campaign is now coming after this company called Sweet Baby Inc., which we'll get into in a second. The other thing that's kind of happened between 2014 to 2015, kind of when this blew up, and today, was all of these people... this harassment problem kind of became the main narrative, even though no one was ever actually hurt or tied to it. And it actually happened both ways. For example, we know that the evidence has been released that Brianna Wu faked harassment to create a larger victim narrative for herself. We know that. And then it actually happened both ways. That people who came out with the Not Your Shield movement actually got suppressed and banned by outlets that were covering Gamergate.
Who's Brianna Wu? I don't think
she was another video game developer that was in the space.
Okay.
But she actually drifts off. She actually goes into normal politics after this, and she just becomes a left winger. But the other ones actually circle back around. Lastly, and most importantly, and you got to bring up the link on this one, Logan Paul is shot by Ice-T in a Law and Order SVU episode about Gamergate.
Game on, NYPD.
Where's that coming from?
Next Wednesday, ripped from the headlines.
This is a game to them. What's the next level?
A violent video game inspires a real crime.
Prepare to be slaughtered.
New
Did you see Logan Paul there?
Next Wednesday.
Prepare to be slaughtered. Did you see the first-person shooter view?
That was terrible acting, too.
Prepare to be slaughtered. Was this before Japan?
I don't know. I probably
would have had.
Yeah, before he got canceled and came back. CIA up. Anyways, yeah. So that was Gamergate 1, and we'll pause there to kind of make sure I got all that out.
Well, yeah, and so there becomes a bunch of things that come out of this. There's always this concern with woke gaming. It's about adding female characters to make it more inclusive. Not like there wasn't already like great female characters.
No, but they were sexualized when they were. They have to be ugly.
Because their boobs are too big and things like that.
And they're too good
like,
looking.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, because like if you think about it, old school gaming, you have like Lara Croft Tomb Raider, Samus Aran from the Metroid series, like Tifa Lockhart from Final Fantasy. You have kind of like which are like powerful female characters, right?
Yes.
Like it's not this new,
but they're well endowed.
But
well endowed and powerful.
Yeah, they're too attractive. It's like
they're setting unrealistic beauty standards for digital female creations.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I mean, Angelina Jolie played Lara Croft.
Yeah.
In the
Can't
original movie.
have that.
Can't have that. No, Angelina can't get jobs because she's too good looking. Of course. Yeah. Right.
I think we should start the cancel boobs hashtag.
Cancel.
Can't have it.
Can't
have it.
Can't have boobs.
That is often that is often a meme in like gaming culture now. Is like, oh no, they're nerfing all these female characters because they're reducing.
So what did it mean? So I think Kyle's right. What it meant was a lot of people were like, man, I just want to play video games, but I'm kind of being forced into a coverage of the thing I like that tries to tell me the things I like are wrong.
Well, and the
like,
wokeness is ruining the stories in the games and things like that.
Or
like
the coverage of the games, right? So like I enjoy a game. I see a review. I'm like, I want to see what this guy had to say about it. And I get forced through this Marxist narrative, right? Rather than just talking about, was the narrative good, right? Was the gameplay good? Was the like how important it is so that we can investigate the minority lives and what they go through and the struggles. It's like, man, I just wanted to play a Japanese game about sword fighting. I don't know. You just see what I mean? Like there was like I have a hobby and I want the coverage of my hobby to somewhat like reflect the purism of the hobby and not be force fed into a particular.
Well, and it's the same thing. Like everybody always complains about how terrible movies are becoming and how there's just like all these woke narratives. It's the same thing.
Yes.
Like it's the exact same
It's just
phenomenon.
an earlier version of it. Even though movie wokeification was happening at the same time, gamers had a much bigger pushback, right? And like we're much more willing to just get on, I mean, because it's all internet people, it's all nerds. We're all on the same message board saying, no, that's BS, and I'm gonna tell you why.
Bunch of keyboard warriors out here.
Yeah, and it worked, right? They pushed out, they changed things, they made a very different, or at least they didn't push out, they pushed underground a tremendous amount of.
Well, and there's a deep meme culture, and we all understand now how memes are so prolific now and prophetic in a lot of ways. Often, like that comes from gaming culture. A lot of that type of stuff comes from, because they're the original internet people. Like they're the ones using the internet to its fullest extent, is like young kids that were all kind of like millennial kids that were on games because they're doing online games. They're playing World of Warcraft. They're in the Call of Duty lobbies, you know, whatever. They're hearing the racist comments in the Call of Duty lobbies.
Any other questions about Gamergate? As the non-Gamergater, as the non-gamer, what's your
look?
Everything making sense?
I'm not a gamer. I just I mostly stick to N64.
How did your brother become so much more of a gamer than you? I see him.
I so much cooler.
Yeah. he gets memes because I see him on Discord. He's playing Baldur's Gate 3.
Yep. You know what? That's a really good question. I think it had a lot to do with who we were hanging out with, what we grew up doing. Right. I was more into like playing music and sports and like doing cars and drugs. And all his buddies. That's what they were into. That's what they did. So that was their social thing. So yeah.
Because like I found it when I was in high school. Like gaming was a very useful way of connecting with friends. Like you didn't always have to be with your friends necessarily in the same room, and you could be, you know, tactically on a team together playing Halo, you know, and you're on comms and you're kind of learning tactics and you're hanging out with your buddies and stuff. Like it was a very good bonding type of thing as a high schooler. Right?
Totally. Did you talk about your emotions?
No,
that's
enough.
toxic
Probably
masculinity.
Not enough.
How
enough.
dare you?
It was actually kind of awesome. Me and my friends, all of our gamer tags were like all X-Men characters. So we'd be getting into the Call of Duty lobbies as like Wolverine, Nightcrawler, nice. All that stuff.
I will say I did.
It was a good team thing.
So I did do the Xbox Live thing for Halo through probably like Halo 3, and then the inflection point was I went to college and like just went and did college shit and like kind of fell away. But I did get way into StarCraft.
Oh, you were a StarCraft player.
StarCraft 1 or 2?
2. Well, both.
Probably 2.
But 2.
You went to I played StarCraft 2 a lot.
Yeah.
What'd you rank?
Oh, I don't know. I didn't like.
You're not a real star.
I'm not a real gamer. I would go on and play like online, whatever.
Sure.
Blizzard. What's the
Battle.net. Yeah.
That's it. Yep. And just do like all the strange games and play all the weird like.
Well, that's actually
a
a big thing too, because I think Blizzard Entertainment has been a very central focal point of a lot of this stuff, especially after the original. Like, so kind of in this in between period between what we're going to be talking about with Gamergate 2.0 versus 1.0, because I think World of Warcraft was probably one of the biggest. I used to play it with a bunch of friends. It was probably one of the biggest games ever for a long period of time.
Like 2005 to
25 million users across the world, all this stuff. But then there started to become this more like corporatization of it, and more like DEI type of things that started happening there. They recently were acquired by Microsoft, Activision Blizzard, after a slew of sexual harassment scandals that were going on. Bobby Kotick just left, who's the CEO, who has Epstein ties.
It's all about round the clock.
Interestingly,
right?
Why is everything about sex already here?
well, the thing that happened there is like there was this stuff where at their big conference they had like a Bill Cosby room, and they would call it that. Like, so you end up having this dynamic, and this is also where you kind of get into with like China.
What's the symbology there?
This is where you get into like China and free Hong Kong stuff. Like all these things start to loop in together, where you have them slamming down on like esports contestants from like their games like Hearthstone and StarCraft and things like that, saying like you can't say free Hong Kong. You can't do that because they have deep pockets in China, right? And they're removing the black characters in their games. Like in Diablo, they would remove the black characters to appease the Chinese market. And so you have all this like wokeness that's happening here inwardly in America and like the Western hemisphere. But when it comes to China, they just throw those principles out the window, right?
Oh, yeah.
So
totally.
like
That's what the NBA did too.
Same exact type of thing, right?
They do it for the same reasons, right?
Yeah.
You get ESG money here, and there you get punished if you don't censor the black guy.
Yeah. Right. So like a lot of this kind of starts with these scandals that are happening with gaming, things, but it elevates into a much more, I think, cognizant and knowledgeable kind of gamer base of like understanding there's these narratives that are being played at me, like I don't fully get it, and it's just like a bunch of like teenagers and kids in their 20s, that are like what is happening here?
Well, in the larger culture at this time, really discovered, and in between this time, from Gamergate to everything else, really discovered online activism, right? And discovered what wokeism was and how pervasive it was and how it was in all of these different elements. And over this time, wokeism got financialized. And that's really what Gamergate 2 is about. So Sweet Baby, this is the Sweet Baby edition from Sweet Baby Inc., which is a narrative design company. So we're gonna have this. It doesn't have any dialogue, but it perfectly explains it. So if you're on video, you'll get it. But I'm gonna try to narrate it to do this right. We'll see if it works.
You can't narrate this, dude.
No, you can't. This is too fast. No. You can't narrate this.
Listen, if you're on an audio-only platform, now's your chance. Just pop over to Spotify.
It's 24 seconds.
Pop it over to YouTube. Make sure to hit the notification bell and shit.
Gamers. Sweet baby. White gamers are picky babies.
Why are they hiring racists?
This is a harassment campaign.
That's a great scene to use.
That's exactly what happened. All right, so basically,
just for the record, some of the nerdiest shit I've ever seen.
If you're a Lord of the Rings fan too, you'll also
it's perfect. It. All right, so basically, Suicide Squad 2 comes out, and it's terrible. It makes Harley Quinn look like a dude, and Harley Quinn is like a sex symbol for a lot of comic book nerds and nerds, right?
This is very much an archetype of that psychotic female character, right?
Right, like crazy hot.
Yeah.
And
Crazy Hot Matrix.
Yeah, I mean, who plays Harley Quinn in the movies? I mean,
yeah, Margot Robbie, right?
Yeah, so
which also had its own controversies.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, but so
same type of stuff.
Made her look like a dude, and it got woke, and people like trace the studio that consults with video games to help them wokeify their content to increase their DEI scores. This one was called Sweet Baby Inc. that consults on, quote, inclusive narrative design. So get this, Joe, you run a gaming studio. You could either spend money on hiring a bunch of new, coders and stuff like that, or you could spend money on institution,
woke consultants
who come in and rework your game to increase your DEI score so you can get more ESG funding. Which would you do? So if you're Larian Studios, you do the first thing. You make a great freaking game and it blows the doors off of gaming, right?
Game of the year at every single award.
Yes.
Which one is that?
That's just an example, right?
Baldur's Gate 3. It's what your brother's been playing on Discord.
Ask Sam about it. He'll tell you about it. Great game.
One of the greatest games I've ever played.
Oh,
to be honest, one of them.
Absolutely. The other side of that is a lot of other games have been coming out, and people have been like, "Why is this happening?" Right? And a lot of them have been connected to either Sweet Baby Inc. or another one of these niche industries, inclusive narrative design consulting firms.
Which and for people that aren't gamers, I think you're able to kind of start to see why is this important, but also what are the corollaries with everything else that goes on in the world. We have this DEI consulting type of stuff. You got to boost your scores. Like this is the infestation, the mind virus that has swept through corporate America, right? And this is just like another example of it.
So the response from this that created Gamergate 2.0 was a Brazilian guy created a Steam group. So Steam groups are just like, it's a way for people to comment on games within Steam, which is an application launcher and market for PC video games from the company Valve. So he puts on this thing that basically just lists from Sweet Baby Inc.'s website all of the games that Sweet Baby Inc. has worked on and said, here are all the games Sweet Baby Inc. works on it. I recommend you don't buy this, so that when you go to the game and you're subscribed to this group, it'll say Sweet Baby, I forget what the game group called.
Well, yes, Steam allows you to like set up these groups, and like people can, it'll be like for like curators, they can be like, these games kind of instill
I recommend
our type of thing, or it's like it's this type of a game, and there'll be like a group associated with this. So this is a group that is saying, was Sweet Baby Inc. a part of it? And so you'll be able to see that when you're on the Steam store page.
Oh, it like automatically labels every game you could buy.
Yeah, because you follow this curator group, and this curator group is marking every single game that has had the stamp of Sweet Baby Inc.
So I'm sure Sweet Baby Inc. loved that.
Well, they try to get him banned off of Steam and the group banned for a harassment campaign. Sound familiar?
Oh.
Yeah. Oh. So, of course, that's what creates the Streisand effect, right? So this random Brazilian dude creates the thing because he doesn't like the wokeism in games and says this is a thing, and it goes nowhere. Like a couple dozen people join, and then they try to get it banned, and it blows up. It's at 250,000 people on it.
Holy moly.
Yes. Well, and you have major streamers that have interviewed him. Like there's a guy named Asmongold who's a big World of Warcraft streamer, one of the biggest streamers in the world on like Twitch, the platform. And so he interviews him, and it just becomes this whole thing where it just Streisand effect keeps blowing up, right?
So
Wild.
This narrative design has a particular story within the gaming industry. So you got this Twitter X
from
guy.
Grums, who, by the way, he's a former World of Warcraft dev from Blizzard Entertainment, and he's somebody that was one of the big key players and talking about everything that was going on with everything I was talking about with all of that.
Yes,
right?
with the fall of Blizzard.
Yeah.
So he put out this thing about this upcoming game called Flintlock and the story of Flintlock that's kind of happened behind the scenes. Now, I want to just frame this. He himself mentions that some of this is rumor, but this is a kind of example of what happens. So Flintlock, the gaming studio, A44 Gaming, they need a new CEO. They bring in a new CEO whose first act is to change the ethnicity of the main character from a white woman to a person of color. Then hire Sweet Baby Inc. They create their own the CEO creates their own narrative design company called Inclusion FX that she runs while she's CEO of A44 Gaming. They delay launch for 2 more years as they rework the game and all the game's narratives to fit a more inclusive narrative design. The game is unplayable and completely out of break. You can kind of go down here a little bit, Kyle. And it is at the very end, like the end of the story is so sad because after all of these things that they go through, the company's like reworks their HR department and it becomes kind of like this like terrible Maoist dictatorship of HR. And then at the end of it, it's bought for an above market price for a game studio that probably shouldn't, be.
Bought by who?
by a larger involvement company. I can't remember. I think it's called SBI.
Probably has some sort of enterprise value that has been given because of its social ranking scores.
I was going to say,
which then starts to make you think of things like, the Silicon Valley Bank collapse and how they were putting all their money into these green energy projects because ESG standards, and right, like this is the social contagion, like the virus bomb that happens.
That is ESG,
right? And when you ask me the hypothetical, I'm the game studio owner, and I have to make the decision between investing in devs or investing in doing the DEI thing through this consultant group so that I can get more money, so that I can hire devs. It creates like all this capital that's malinvested into this thing that doesn't create value for the people that pay me. Right. And in fact, destroys value because I'm creating then a product that my primary customers don't want.
Additionally, there's a perverse incentive in most corporations so that if you invest in DEI, that increases your ESG score, that gets more investment, you personally get a bonus.
For sure.
Not only that, if you get stock and you know that you can just increase the value by making it more woke and then sell off the company to somebody else and give them a game that's apparently, by rumor, in shambles and unworkable. I mean, what are you going to do?
Well, right. I could potentially greatly benefit by way of that circuitous route of malinvestment.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, what you have is this like zombie company that has a valuation that's completely arbitrary and based on nothing of real value. Where does that go? And when does that blow up? Because how many other companies are there like that?
Right.
A lot.
So guess who's still doing this work and actually has been doing this work since the beginning? That wasn't brought out during Gamergate 1, but now we know because people have gone back and looked at it.
Oh, Anita Sarkeesian? Is she part of the consulting firm?
Guess who is now doing consulting? Zoe. Is now doing consulting work. If you look at her Twitter page, you'll find that.
Welcome back, Zoe Quinn.
So, no, it's okay. It's fine. There is who else was it? We brought her up before.
Lee Alexander.
Lee Alexander is now doing narrative design. So all of these people who were game developers and female game developers have now, since after Gamergate 1.0, joined Anita in this narrative design stuff and been infiltrating from the backside of the ESG
So they've
movement.
gone from creating their own bad games to then helping other people create bad games.
It's a vicious cycle that never stops.
So let me give you more examples that they've pointed to. Spider-Man 2. Spider-Man 2, which is Spider-Man 1 was an excellent game. I haven't played Spider-Man 2, so I can't comment on it.
I can comment on it.
What'd you think, Bennett?
Just go through what you were going to say.
Okay.
And then I'll have some thoughts.
Well, at least one controversy that was covered, but didn't get into the mainstream, was that they degendered the Spanish language version of the game. So in romantic languages, you have
masculine, feminine.
Yeah, they took that out and like.
It's Latinx, Dave.
Because of that. So you got all these Spanish gamers like, what the fuck? Like, what just happened? Why is everything?
Oh my God.
They gave Mary Jane Watson jowls. So in the first Spider-Man game, she's pretty, right? And like, she's not gorgeous, but she's just like a pretty girlfriend character. And the second one, and they give her like side missions and they make her a reporter and they do give her more gravitas as a character than the comic books do. I had, as a Spider-Man fan, since I was a kid, I had no problem with Spider-Man's one version of MJ because they just make her they just give her a little more agency and they make her interesting, but they retain the essence of the character, which is that she has her own ambitions and becoming a reporter. And they kind of take that away from Peter and they just make him a scientist. No problem, because you maintain a certain dynamism that works as them as a couple that is maintained from the comic books. So it kind of honors that. In this one, they just made her ugly for some reason, and they they just took away like her sexual appeal.
# cancel boobs
for no reason, right?
She got nerfed.
It wasn't like before. It wasn't like before. She was like they were like hanging out. Like she wasn't Laura Croft. She was just dressed like a woman, right? And in this one, she's dressed like a woman, like rather relatively modesty. But they made her face, like they took the actress that was playing her, that they scanned the face of, and they made her less good looking. Why? Nobody knows, but for some reason, that's what they did. Those are other complaints that they have for MJ. They did that in Zero Dawn as well.
There's been a lot of allegations that have happened around that. I think that happened in like Last of Us 2 at one point too, which I never played the Last of Us games. But
so what was your review of Spider-Man 2 before I get it?
So, I mean, I think the overall game is awesome, but there are some like side missions where like, really? Like one of them is, Miles' character, you help like this couple ask each other to homecoming and they're a gay couple, and it's just like little things like that, and I have no problem with it. Like I don't care if like about having gay characters. It's just like it feels like it was just thrown in there for the sake of being in there,
shoehorned in, making it a tokenized experience, right? So like the now side quest that has nothing to do with the larger quest is now to go and get a gay couple together. Right?
That's the play right there. You make the main quest, the thing that everybody like has to do to complete the game, make it super badass, and then you just put all the woke stuff on the side quests to boost your scores. That's the play right there. That's what you do.
That is how you game the system.
That's how you. It's like we can have the best of both worlds right here.
That is so funny. Okay, I have a left brain theory I want to throw at you guys, or just a thought, I guess. Okay, so what if? Okay, so we know about like pornography, for example, is like hypersexualization, or junk food is hyperpalatable. Video games, perhaps they're hyper aesthetic. Perhaps the feminine characters are over sexualized. Let's just say, right? Well, are they looking out for gamers' girlfriends, right, by making the game characters less attractive so that gamers' girlfriends don't feel less than, right? They don't feel
more attached to the video game characters.
They don't want their boyfriends more attached to the video game girls than them.
I don't think that's what's happening.
Yeah. We have to imagine. We have to level the playing field here, right? And by the way, I'm not calling gamer girlfriends unattractive. I'm just saying.
I was going to say.
I'm just saying. You can create
that gamers have ugly girlfriends.
You can create you can create unrealistic beauty standards through video game design.
All I want is the unrealistic beauty standards to be applied to the male characters as well.
So you got to make them like dad bods.
I just want all of the Avengers are all just dad bodied out, and they're just like.
I love that idea. I just want good character archetypes. That's all I want. I just want good character.
I take it back. I want the opposite. I don't want realistic. What I want is fantasy. Well, when I'm doing fantasy,
it depends on the genre.
That my guy is a super destroying, wreck machine like God of War, for example, Kratos from God of War. I just want to hear a Norse story from Kratos of God of War. After he's destroyed the Greek pantheon, I want him to go to Norse, and I want him to go through the North pantheon and destroy them all and have a great time doing it.
But you want him to do it,
but I want him to do it while he's jacked. Okay, because that's awesome. Because I want to look at the. Okay, so there's two different ways to think of media, right? And aesthetic philosophy. You can either do it that's relatable, so that I can identify with or you could do it to the human ideal, right? One is a superhero story, and the other one is a narrative, like a common narrative story. What I don't want is my superhero story to not have that, right? Because I want the ideal in the superhero story. I want the unbeatable.
And all this kind of depends on the genre too. Like if you're playing a slice of life farming simulator, then you want normal people.
Yeah, right.
But if you're playing like badass war heroes, then you want badass war heroes, right? Like
But what they did in God of War is they said, yes, you're going to go through the Norse pantheon, but we're just going to make one of them black for no explanation whatsoever.
Yeah.
They're going to retain their Norse name, but they're just going to make her black. And her grandmother, black. But no one else, and just cuz. And then you're like, why? Why would you do that? Are you erasing, a people group in some ways? Are you trying to shoehorn in like that? Oh, because you're white, you don't actually deserve to have a history that is, accurate. That
goes back to what I always say. Liberalism is just it homogenizes everything.
Yes.
It tries to blend everything together.
It makes everything into America. What we're talking about is Norse mythology. Now, don't get me wrong. Norse mythology in God of War is not accurate, right? It really reverses relationships around. It changes things for the sake of making a video game. But at what point was it necessary for the video game and the story of the video game to make someone black for no reason? It was probably done so in order for them to raise money for ESG so that they could have more capital in the United States.
But we also know game companies are completely happy to remove the black characters when it's necessary given on the market.
Get past to sell better in Asia.
For Western ESG programs, you gotta make it all the stuff. But as soon as we're in China, pop it out. That character, we gotta either eliminate that character or change the skin tone. Right.
Fascinating.
I thought of another one for Spider-Man 2. It's such a throw-in, but it actually bugs me when I hear it. There's one part. It's just like, so Harry's a character in this one, and they're at this startup, and Harry talks about how he created a more diverse board. And I was like, all right, there's your DEI. And it was just like such a little small line. Like people probably don't even notice it, but I think we've talked about it enough that I'm starting to pick up on things like that. And I'm just like,
triggered.
And we mentioned like Baldur's Gate 3 still has those types of things too, right? Like we mentioned that as being this super awesome game, but it still has those elements in there that exist.
God of War Ragnarok is a good game too. Like a lot, it isn't to say all these games it touched are necessarily bad in terms of gameplay and other things. Many of them are, right? It's kind of crazy how many small studios that really didn't cover like the basics of making a good playable game spent a bunch of money on these studios, on these consulting. But then you have major studios that are doing it, like Insomniac's a great studio that did the Drake series. Drake series is another great example. At the end of the Drake series, they undermined their entire story by changing everything. When they fired the old female writer in a whole other story that is also all driven by woke DEI, and they ruined that series that way. So another one, right, was a narrative that came out after Baldur's Gate, which is don't expect more games like Baldur's Gate.
Yeah, it's like an unrealistic expectation on devs. Like not everybody can be Larian Studios, and Baldur's Gate 3 was an incredible game where it was like cheaper than most games because now games, inflation has made it so that like a standard game is $70 right now. Baldur's Gate 3 was like $40, and you got to be part of the development process and go into early access. I know you, me, and a friend Dave, we played in the early access together, and you kind of got to see the development process and go through it. And then when it finally came out, you just got the game for free. Like you had the game because you supported in the beginning, and you just played in the early access, right?
That's cool.
Where now you have all these games, and again, it was like $40. I'm pretty sure I spent $40 on Baldur's Gate 3
for early access,
and I've had massive amounts of fun in that game over many years, even before it came out. Then you have these new games that are all $70, massive undertakings, just flopping over and over and over again, just not doing well.
So how long until that paradigm is over? How long until the money runs out? How long can studios create games that don't sell well before, like the Disney Plus thing? They kind of like realize, well, shoot, maybe we shot ourselves in the foot on this one.
It just matters whether or not gaming like takes it seriously enough to boycott on part of it, because some of these are still selling pretty good, right? Like God of War Ragnarok did well, but so it was a pretty minor one, right? So like it's where the worst infractions happen.
Are most people overlooking or just like kind of looking past the DEI crap and embracing what they do like about the game, ignoring the rest?
Yeah, a lot of it feels kind of like conservatives and like mainstream culture where they're like so used to getting beat down all the time, but they still kind of keep just like funding the stuff and and
like,
now
there's that wokeism again.
And it was like, okay, continue sending the kid to that college. When it's like, at some point you kind of got to just stop buying the stuff, stop purchasing the products because you are being milked out. And there's a kind of like a thing where you appease to the left because like they're going to make a massive uproar if you don't appease to them. But then the conservatives are so used to going along with the program because they're used to being the people that get bullied on the late night shows and all this stuff. Right? And I think there's a thing with gaming that is similar to that.
Are there like kind of anti-woke game studios?
Helldivers.
Yeah, Helldivers was a big thing. I saw there was something that came out.
Their developer basically, some woke people were like, "Well, we want to make sure our capes can have the pride flag on it or something like that," and they were like, "No, we don't want politics in our game. Shut up." And they're like, everyone was cool about it. Like it's kind of and that's like the biggest winning game this year. It was a small developer. It's all a big joke, but of excellent gameplay, and they have
to fight for managed democracy.
Yeah, right.
Check out Dave's monologue on it.
Yeah, did a monologue on it.
We'll put the link in the show notes.
So another interesting story that came out around gaming was that March 9th, the GAO report revealed that the FBI is actively monitoring gamers for extremism from The Intercept. And the report suggests that the FBI and Department of Homeland Security are not doing enough, and that 15 to 20% of adult gamers are being exposed to white supremacy because of video games. Well,
it actually reminds me of during the War on Terror, you had you had the intelligence agencies going in and tracking things on World of Warcraft.
Right.
Because Al-Qaeda is probably recruiting people on this massive online world with 25 million people.
We found that from the Snowden files that they paid people to play World of Warcraft to spy on people.
Yeah, there's like CIA agents. That's their job.
Is that like your dream job? Like go to work for the CIA?
That's a dope job.
But could you? Now it's worse.
I'm raiding so hard right now.
Sorry, boss. I can't talk. Right. I can't go to the meeting. I got to raid.
Keep undercover.
Boss, we set a record for this raid. This raid, I need a bonus.
World first. World first Nixia run CIA.
So what's worse is what this suggests is that the apparatuses to spy on American civilians playing video games in America with other Americans and people worldwide is for these gaming companies to build portals specifically to monitor your messages, transactions, and even in-game actions to look for extremist behavior. So the extremist behavior is defined, including environmental terrorism. So if you, in your Minecraft world, burn down a forest, you might become a suspect for environmental terrorism.
You're an eco-terrorist.
If you, in your Skyrim game, decide to wipe out the town of White Bridge?
No.
White Falls? I'm forgetting it. The first one you get to. It's been a long time since I played Skyrim. But anyways, one of the things that people do after you've played a game a couple hundred hours is you just start killing random NPCs just for fun because you can in that game. And so people will do that. And
can't wait to see what happens when
might be a genocider. Oh, jeez. Genocide.
Or
GTA. The game is to commit crimes.
I'll be curious too because I know the Elder Scrolls 6 is in development right now, which will be the successor to Skyrim. And Skyrim's one of the biggest games of all time. And Bethesda has not been having a great track record as of late.
Oh, yeah.
And I'll be curious to see how much of this stuff creeps into what is going to be... Like, that's where the riot happens. If they screw up an Elder Scrolls game... that's where the gamers riot.
It's going to be crazy. Yeah, because Starfield, for example, people were pretty pumped on and did not do well.
And you got to watch out. The nerds in the streets, they're going to have chainmail. You're going to have long swords out there. You got to be careful. This could get ugly. I know my brother's packing some serious armor, aren't you, Sam? I don't mean to out your stash, but
and it's
snitch.
We might.
It's concealed.
We might give people.
He's got a permit.
We might give people the idea that this is a small thing, but this is a huge industry. It's bigger than movies. Mm-hmm. Right? It is $660 billion annual revenue.
No, like when I was talking about Blizzard Entertainment getting bought by Microsoft, like we're talking the government's trying to come in and do antitrust laws to break them up because it's like so big.
It's so big.
Like this is a huge industry.
There are 2.7 billion video gamers globally.
That's more than I would have expected.
If you can influence that,
it's huge.
You can do that. So that's one of the reasons why the woke efforts there, right, is because you want to create subtle influences that are substantial there. Yeah. And then, if you can get people to think differently there, you're affecting your biggest demographic for opposition, which is what we post in the Discord, the individualist hierarchical white male. Right, which is the biggest demographic within gaming. Well, though not exclusively to gamers. Like it's incredibly diverse, actually, statistically, to most other forms of hobbies.
Well, and we talk a lot about narrative control on this too, and storytelling is a very good way of controlling narratives. And a lot of narratives being formed are kids, teenagers in the video games that they're playing because they're kind of going to that for kind of like their storytelling entertainment now much more so than other things.
Right.
So and video game storytelling is becoming way better than it ever has been really.
Right.
For in a lot of games, not all, a lot are bad. A lot of bad because of this,
yes.
Right? So if you want to control the minds of the youth, get them in here.
Right. And
it's also if you want to benefit the youth, create good stories on the mediums that they are consuming, right?
So as classically, 60% of millennials play video games. 50% of Gen Z and Gen Alphas do, right? So that almost more than half, are playing games. The interesting thing there is Conservative Inc. is so happy to never win anything. They have to get in the middle of that and have all the right takes on the ESG, but say all the wrong things to gamers. Including saying, you don't want to last thing you ever do is let your kids play video games. In fact, adult men should not play video games at all. Thank you, Matt Walsh, who came in with this hot take and got absolutely smashed by the gamers afterwards.
Gamers rise up. We're under attack.
Is that the video game industry, without a lot of fanfare, has transformed into a tool of both propaganda and surveillance. It's an effective way to indoctrinate children precisely because it hasn't received much attention, and also because children spend, many of them, hundreds of hours a year, and that might be an undercount, a severe undercount, with this kind of content. So it should get a lot of our attention. And now finally that attention is here. And it's yet another reason to keep these games as far away from your children as possible. And if you do that, games journalists, literally the lowest form of journalists on the planet, will accuse you of harassment. And that's exactly how you'll know that you're doing the right thing.
So I mean, his strategy here is obviously avoid and abstain, as opposed to try to, work from inside the system and create games that have positive narratives.
It's like a typical Ludditism that happens.
It's ironic for a guy who's pushing like kids' books with positive narratives, right?
Well, that should be, in my mind, that should be what you're doing too. In the same way where it's like, let's conservatives should start making kids' books. Like, it should also just be, make better movies, make better video games, right? And
instead disengage from culture.
Exactly.
Yes.
Shield your kids from these things.
And then disenfranchise yourself.
Hide your wife.
Disenfranchise 60% of the demographics you need for the future of the movement you're trying to build, who are making themselves your allies and saying instead, and this is from his other quotes, not from this one, that video games, I'm tired of ignoring the fact that video games are violent and are bad for people, and adult men aren't manly if they don't play video games. Like, having this dude say that I'm not manly because I play video games. No, screw you, dude. Like, you don't get to tell me how to raise my kids, number one. Number two, you don't get to say what's manly or not when you're over here with your flannel on. And bring up this picture that I have of him without his beard. One second. I don't want to be called.
What is happening?
This dude, it ticks me off. Matt Walsh jumping into this, be like, oh yeah, this just shows that we shouldn't play video games and video games aren't manly. This is Matt Walsh without his beard.
He looks like a gamer.
Yeah, the fedora.
Sorry,
I don't know. Maybe that's not him without his beard. But I'm just saying, it's just really.
Wait, is this not substantiated?
I don't know.
I don't think that's him. That can't be him, right?
That looks like him.
Pretty like him. Yeah.
It just a couple years ago.
Looks like he's kind of fatter.
He's skinny fat.
It frustrates me to have like this kind of grifting that he jumped onto the bandwagon of this with these other things like the government spying on gamers and all these things. So therefore, just disengage. Mm-hmm. Right? It's just ridiculous.
Well, I mean, it kind of goes with the Candace stuff too, right? Like, I mean, it seems like the youthful energy is going with those types of people, and he's Daily Wire. It seems like they're pushing out the youthful energy right now.
They don't want
it. They don't want that youthful energy.
Interestingly, Matt Walsh did have good takes on the Tucker Israel stuff when that came out too. I was actually happy about that, but it reminded me of this whole thing reminded me of his takes on video games and his whole thing. Like, it's a bad strategy, number one. Number two, he has no philosophical basis for it other than just old things good. If you said the same thing about books, some books have propaganda in it. Therefore, don't have your kids read books.
It's the same, right? It's the exact same thing.
Right. Yes. It's don't engage challenging ideas because they're scary.
Right. Or mediums that I just don't like because they're not the mediums that are wholesome. Right. Sure. If your kid can get onto Minecraft and he can play on Minecraft with his buddies and create something cool and innovative and creative. Yeah, sure. Or he can get on there and he can get some woke DEI BS by playing some other game. Right. So be a parent that's actively engaged in what your kid is doing and not just passively throw them in front of a video game just like you wouldn't in front of television or anything else. Like a kid who reads too much is also a problem
happen.
If what he's reading is a bunch of propaganda.
Well, and there's a hierarchy of video games too. Like a lot of video games are just straight up like they're casino machines, especially if you have your kids on like the mobile gaming type of stuff. Like it is like it's like a dopamine casino hit rather than, like there's a hierarchy of video games. Like there are very good video games that I think would be very developmental for kids as well, like strategic thinking, good storytelling, all these things. Like so there's a difference there.
Yeah, but he doesn't play video games. He doesn't know anything about it. Yeah, he's more than willing to criticize anyone who does it. And it's just like that's the worst kind of conservatism, right? That's just like
an anti-gamer on the podcast.
I can be ignorant while having strong opinions about it. It's just like, geez,
hey, that's my whole shtick, man. Go easy.
Go yourself.
Speaking of a gamer, Elon Musk.
Elon Musk.
Which is funny. Like, I just find this as we start to put a bow on this. You literally have the world's richest man who's like putting stuff into space, and he's live streaming on Twitter. He's live streaming him playing Diablo.
Yeah.
I played Diablo 2. Yeah.
He's playing Diablo 2 live streaming.
The new one, Diablo 4 is pretty good.
Sick,
Just your casual,
Nice one, Elon.
your casual journalist, Twitch streamer, Elon Musk,
Richest man in the world. It's a strange time to be alive.
Anyways, that's Gamergate 2.0. You now know it. What is it? The question is Joe, what does it, and Kyle, what does it mean for the normies? Like, what should you take away? Why was it important for us to tell you about this issue with Gamergate?
I mean, I'll say no element of culture is safe from propaganda and potential use to control the way you think. And unfortunately, it's just a reality of the time that we're living in that you can't let your guard down on this stuff. You have to be aware. You have to understand the mechanisms that the powers that be are using to try to get you to think a certain way. And I think that you guys have done a great job of dissecting this and helping people understand why it's important, especially those outside the industry like myself, and help those within the industry understand, some frameworks to use to think about the way that, they might be manipulated potentially if we're not careful. So good job.
It's an info war.
Yeah, I think it operationalizes. So we've talked about ESG a lot and DEI and kind of what those mean. But I think the story of Sweet Baby Inc. operationalizes and puts into a narrative framework the problem of ESG and DEI in a tangible way, right? It isn't the abstraction. It is now like, this is how it ruins a product for people to consume.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, and that's exactly it. It's very easy for people to see everything that happened with like Silicon Valley Bank and kind of this ESG implosion because of all their malinvestments. But it's kind of like, what does that have to do with me? Like, I'm not investing in this stuff. It doesn't really matter to me. But this is like another area is like, yeah, in your day-to-day life, the hobbies you are doing are being affected by this, right? Or, it's also the Riley Gaines stuff, the competitive sports that you're engaged with, they're affected by this, right? And we're starting to see the downstream effects of how these like academic ideas are activating like a mind virus through society and affecting everything that it puts its tendrils into.
Yeah. Well, guys, on that note, if you want to be a part of the ongoing conversation, which I'm sure will continue because there's a lot of hot stuff here.
Gamers rise up.
Jump into our Discord and join the conversation and help us understand what you want to hear us talk about next time. For now, though, I think it's maybe time for us to go behind the Iron Curtain and talk about Hunter Biden as a CIA asset.
Come on, man.
Thanks for watching. Jump in if you want to be a part of this members only thing. Check out the membership tiers in the description, in the show notes, and we will see you there. Cheers, everybody.
Peace. I need to see it.
Thanks for tuning in to Human Reaction. Help us fight internet censorship by liking, commenting, subscribing, following, and sharing the show with your friends. To find us around the internet, visit linktree.com/humanreactionpod.